My identity has been stolen, and they opened a loan in my name. I reported it immediately, and 1 hour later, the police were at my door. Good day, dear listeners. I'm so glad to hear everything. Please like this video, listen to my story until the end, and tell me which city you are listening from. I'd love to see how far this story has reached.
The message arrived at 6:12 a.m., just as I was making tea in my chipped Wedgwood cup. Your personal loan for $38,400 has been approved, but I had never applied for a loan. At 74, I had no debt, no car payment, and no reason to borrow money. Then I saw my full name, my social security number, and my address. That was when I knew this was not a mistake. Someone had stolen my life on paper. I didn't ignore it. My hands were steady when I called the number listed in the message. I've learned that panic is a luxury for the unprepared. The young man on the phone sounded rehearsed but polite. Yes, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore. The loan was approved online yesterday at 8:47 p.m. Yes, the funds were already dispersed. Yes, the account had been verified through personal identification questions. Which questions I asked? He read them off. Mother's maiden name, first pet, the street I grew up on in Savannah. Every answer correct. I felt something tighten under my ribs. Those weren't answers you could guess. Those were answers you heard at Thanksgiving when someone asked about old stories, and you smiled and told them about your tabby cat Marbles who used to sleep in the bread basket. I did not apply for this loan, I said evenly. Flag it as identity theft immediately. There was a pause, the kind where someone realizes this is no longer a routine call. He transferred me to the fraud department. I gave my statement, requested a case number, and wrote it down in my little burgundy moleskin notebook. Case ID, time representative name, extension number. I asked where the funds had been sent. To a checking account ending in 4421, the woman said, "That is not my account." "No, ma'am." I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still at my kitchen table. The oatmeal had gone cold. Outside, my neighbor's sprinkler clicked rhythmically across his hydrangeas as if the world had decided this was an ordinary Tuesday. It wasn't. I logged into my own bank portal. Everything looked intact. No new accounts, no outgoing transfers. But when I checked my credit report, because yes, I know how to do that myself, I saw the inquiry from a lender based less than 12 meters from my son Daniel's house. 12 meters is nothing in our town. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Daniel had helped me file taxes before. He had copies of documents. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, once insisted on organizing my paperwork during a Sunday visit. She said I kept things like it was, 1953. She laughed when she said it. I laughed too. Now I wasn't laughing. At 10 o'clock, Daniel called me. "Mom." "Hey, you okay?" "You sounded weird in that voicemail." I hadn't left him a voicemail. "I didn't call you Daniel." A small silence. Not long, just enough. "Oh, huh. Must have been thinking of someone else," he said lightly. "You sure you're okay?" "You get confused with those spam emails sometimes." "I spoke with the fraud department this morning," I replied. "Someone opened a loan in my name." Another pause. "This one heavier. Wow, that's crazy. You sure you didn't click something?" "No." "Well, these companies make mistakes. You know how you are with passwords." I looked at my notebook at the neat lines of ink documenting every step. I am not careless. I am not confused. I am not a porcelain figurine to be rearranged. "I've filed an official report." I said they're investigating. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Mom, maybe don't escalate it yet. Sometimes it's easier to just handle it quietly. Handle it quietly." $40,000 isn't quiet, I answered. When we hung up, I noticed something else in my email. A confirmation message from the lender sent not just to me, but CCD to another address. It was partially obscured, but I could read enough. M.Whitfield, 84 at Whitfield. Marissa's maiden name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and took out the old metal file box from under my bed. Inside were copies of my social security card, my pension documents, the deed to this house. I counted everything, nothing missing. But someone didn't need the originals. They just needed the numbers. And someone had them. By noon, I had placed a freeze on all 3 credit bureaus. I updated every password. I added 2-factor authentication to accounts I didn't even use anymore. I called the lender again and requested the full application record, including the IP address used to submit it. "Ma'am, that information may be provided to law enforcement," the representative said carefully. "Good," I replied, "because law enforcement will be involved." At 2:17 p.m., Daniel texted me, "Mom, can we talk in person? Don't do anything drastic." I stared at the word drastic as if protecting myself were hysteria, as if silence were maturity. I texted back, "You can come by at 5. Then I closed my phone and went outside to trim my rosemary bush. The scent clung to my fingers, sharp and grounding. I have lived through harder things than this. I have buried a husband. I have survived layoffs and cancer scares, and raising a son who once set the garage on fire trying to build a go-kart. If someone thought I was too old to fight back, they had forgotten who taught them how to stand in the first place. Daniel arrived at exactly 5, as if punctuality could still pass for integrity. He didn't knock the way he used to. 3 quick taps and then my name. Now it was a firm official rap, like he was visiting a client. I opened the door before he could do it again. He walked in without waiting to be invited, kissed the air near my cheek, and sat at the kitchen table. His eyes moved around the room, quick and measuring. He noticed the file box on the counter. He noticed the notebook. "You didn't have to go nuclear over an email, Mom," he began. "I verified it with the lender." He rubbed his jaw. "Companies mess up. Identity theft happens all the time. You filing police reports could make this messy. I have not filed a police report," I said carefully. "Yet." That word hung between us. He leaned forward. "Look, sometimes banks need documentation fast. If you overreact, it freezes accounts, flags things. It could affect people connected to you." "Connected to me, Daniel," I said, folding my hands. "Why would my report affect anyone unless they were involved?" His eyes flickered. There it was again. That microscopic hesitation, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. He smiled too wide. "You're reading into things. I found an email copied on the loan confirmation. Whitfield Marissa's maiden name. Silence. He sat back slowly, crossing his arms. "You're accusing my wife now. I am observing facts." He stood up and walked to the sink, turning on the faucet, though there was nothing in it. The water ran for several seconds before he shut it off. He didn't look at me. "Marissa handles a lot of paperwork," he said. "She's organized. Maybe she used her email to help you with something and it got mixed up." I did not ask for help. "You don't always remember." "Stop," I said, not raising my voice. "Just one word." He froze. I found that calm unsettles people more than shouting. Shouting gives them something to push against. Calm makes them slip. "I manage my own finances," I continued. "I know exactly what I apply for and what I don't. This loan was submitted at 8:47 p.m. Where were you last night, Daniel?" "At home with Marissa." "Yes, and your laptop." He hesitated again. "Why does that matter?" "Because the lender will provide the IP address when law enforcement requests it." There it was. The first crack, a flicker of alarm that he tried to swallow. "You really are going to the police?" he asked quietly if necessary. He walked back to the table and placed both palms on the surface, leaning over me. He used to do that when he was 12 and trying to intimidate boys who teased him. It didn't work then either. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice. "Sometimes families help each other out. Sometimes things get tight. You've always said we're supposed to support each other. Support, not steal. If you needed money," I replied, "you could have asked." His jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. It never is when someone thinks they won't get caught." The words landed harder than I intended. For a second, something raw flashed across his face. Anger, yes, but also something like resentment that had been fermenting for years. You have this house paid off, he said. Savings Dad's pension. You sit here clipping herbs and reading while we juggle bills and daycare. And so you open a loan in my name. I asked. I didn't say that. No? I agreed softly. You didn't. The room felt smaller suddenly. The clock ticked louder. I could hear my own breathing. He straightened up. Just give me a day. Don't escalate this. Let me talk to Marissa. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding doesn't fill out Social Security fields correctly, I said. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it quickly and flipped it face down. That small movement told me more than anything else. Who is it? I asked. Work. I held out my hand. Show me Mom. That's ridiculous. If there is nothing to hide, show me. He didn't move. The silence stretched long enough for me to notice something else. His car keys on the counter. Attached to them was a small brass tag from a local credit union, the same credit union listed on my credit report inquiry. I reached for my notebook. What are you doing? He demanded, documenting this conversation. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're acting paranoid. No, I said, writing the time down. I am acting informed. He grabbed his keys. If you go to the police, you're blowing this out of proportion. You'll hurt your grandkids. Think about them. There it was. The weaponization of love. I am thinking about them, I replied. I am thinking about what example I set if I allow this. He walked toward the door, then stopped. For a moment, I thought he might confess. Instead, he said something colder. You're not as sharp as you think you are. The door closed behind him. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the place where he'd been. My chest felt tight, but not from doubt, from clarity. At 5:42 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was the lender. Mrs. Whitmore. The woman said, her voice more serious than before. There's been an attempt to access the loan account again. Someone tried to change the contact phone number. To what number? I asked. She read it aloud. It was Daniel's. I didn't call Daniel back. Instead, I put on my coat, took my handbag, the old leather one with the stubborn clasp, and drove straight to his house. Not to accuse. Not yet. Just to observe. Marissa opened the door before I knocked, as if she had been watching through the side window. She wore that tight smile she reserves for PTA meetings and neighbors she secretly dislikes. Eleanor, this is unexpected. I was nearby. I lied. Thought I'd say hello. Daniel was in the living room pacing. He stopped when he saw me, and for a split second, irritation flared across his face before he masked it. Mom, he said carefully. We were just about to call you, I'm sure. I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of something citrusy and artificial, like one of those plug-in diffusers meant to suggest cleanliness. On the kitchen island sat an open laptop. Marissa moved quickly, almost too quickly, to close it halfway. Can I get you tea? She asked sweetly. No, thank you. My eyes drifted casually across the counter. There was a stack of mail, a ceramic bowl with keys, a half-eaten slice of caca on a plate, and an envelope from the same credit union whose name now made my pulse slow and deliberate. I picked it up. Oh, that's nothing, Marissa said quickly. Just a promotional thing. The envelope was already opened. Promotions don't usually come addressed to the same branch that approved my loan yesterday. I said evenly. Daniel exhaled sharply. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. I turned the envelope over. On the inside flap, faint but visible, was a printed reference number. I had memorized mine earlier. The first 6 digits matched. Not a coincidence. Why is your credit union receiving correspondence tied to my application? ID, I asked. Marissa's composure slipped first. Because we were trying to help you, she snapped. You've been struggling with bills and we thought consolidating. I have no bills to consolidate. I said, you don't know everything. She shot back. You forget things. You leave statements unopened. Daniel worries about you. Daniel stepped in quickly. She's not saying you're incapable, just that. Sometimes it's easier if we manage things. Manage, I repeated softly. I walked past them and into the small home office near the hallway. They didn't stop me, which told me they were more afraid of what I might already know than what I might find. On the desk was a shredder. Beside it, a small pile of paper strips that hadn't been emptied yet. I picked up a few fragments, my name part of my social security number. I felt something shift inside me then. Not grief, not even anger, something colder, something final. Marissa's voice followed me. That's Private Eleanor. Yes, I agreed. It is. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We were going to tell you. When I asked. He didn't answer. After the money cleared, I continued. After you paid off whatever you needed. Or after I noticed my credit ruined. You don't understand the pressure we're under, Marissa burst out. Medical bills, the twins' tuition. You sit in that quiet house of yours with your antique china and your little herb garden. And because I have stability, I interrupted calmly, you decided it was yours. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. It was just temporary. We were going to pay it back. With what I asked, another loan in someone else's name. He flinched. There it was, not just desperation pattern. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't look at it. I already knew it would be the fraud department or perhaps the credit bureau confirming the freeze. I gave you a day, I said. You used it to try to change the phone number on the loan account. Marissa's eyes widened. You're tracking that, yes! Daniel looked at her sharply. You said they wouldn't notice. They weren't supposed to, she hissed back. Silence. Real silence this time. No pretense. No careful phrasing. I walked back into the kitchen and set the envelope down precisely where I found it. You had access to my paperwork. I said you answered security questions only family would know. You routed funds to an account you control, and then you tried to alter the contact information once I reported it. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Mom, no. I said gently but firmly, do not call me that right now. Marissa folded her arms. So what you're going to send your own son to jail, I am going to protect myself, I replied. Daniel's face hardened. If you involve the police, this blows up everything. The kids will find out. The neighborhood will find out. You'll be the reason this family falls apart. I looked at him for a long moment. The boy I raised the man standing in front of me and the stranger I was meeting for the first time all layered over each other. This family, I said quietly, fell apart the moment you decided I was expendable. I walked toward the door. Behind me, Marissa's voice turned sharp again. You're overreacting. At your age, stress like this isn't good for you. I paused at the threshold. At my age, I said, without turning around, I have nothing left to be afraid of. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. A notification from my bank. A second inquiry had just been submitted under my name 5 minutes ago from the same IP address. I didn't go back inside. I stood on their porch staring at the notification on my phone while the porch light flickered above me. A second inquiry. Same lender network. Same timestamp window. They weren't panicking. They were doubling down. Inside, I could hear muffled voices, sharp, urgent, the kind of whispers that aren't meant to be whispers. I walked to my car slowly, deliberately, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Once inside, I locked the doors and called the fraud department again. There's been another inquiry, I said calmly 5 minutes ago. The woman on the line inhaled softly. Yes, I see that. It was flagged immediately due to your freeze. Good, ma'am. The IP address associated with both attempts has now been marked as suspicious activity. Can you tell me the general location? There was a pause. It's within your residential zip code. I know. When I hung up, I didn't drive home. I drove to the local police station instead. The building hasn't changed in 30 years. Same brick exterior, same faded flag. I parked under the streetlight and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. My pulse was steady. Not because I felt brave, because I felt certain. Inside, a young officer directed me to a small desk. I introduced myself, gave my age, and explained the situation without dramatics, just facts, dates, times, case numbers. I handed over my notebook. He flipped through the pages, eyebrows lifting slightly at the level of detail. You documented everything he said? Yes. Do you know who might be responsible? I have suspicions, I replied, but I would prefer the evidence to speak. He nodded, appreciating that. I provided the email screenshot with the Whitfield address, the partial reference number from the envelope, the phone number that had attempted to change the account contact, Daniel's number. I even mentioned the shredded documents in the home office. Did you take any of the shredded material? He asked. No, but it's still in their trash bin. That earned me a longer look. Ma'am, he said carefully, this amount qualifies as felony fraud. If your suspicions are correct, this could lead to arrest. I understand. Are you prepared for that? Prepared. I thought of Daniel at 5 years old asleep on my chest, of Marissa holding my newborn grandchildren in the hospital, of Sunday dinners with lemon chicken and porcelain plates. I did not prepare for this, I said quietly, but I will not carry debt for someone else's crime. He typed steadily, filing the official report. Once it was logged, he gave me a copy and a case number. Different from the lenders, this one carried weight. Given the repeated attempts today, he added, "We may move quickly." I thanked him and stepped back outside. As I reached my car, my phone rang. "Daniel," I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded immediately. I protected myself. "You went to the police, didn't you?" "I filed a report." "Yes." He let out a harsh laugh. "You really want to destroy us. You destroyed trust," I replied. "I'm simply addressing the consequences. You think they're going to believe you over us," he snapped. "You're elderly, confused, emotional." There it was again, the narrative they'd already rehearsed. "I have documentation," I said evenly. "Do you—" "Silence then, more quietly. Mom, please, we can fix this. I'll cancel everything. I'll pay fees. Just withdraw the report." "It doesn't work like that," I answered. Behind him, I heard Marissa's voice frantic. "Tell her to stop. Tell her they can't prove anything. They could prove plenty. Daniel," I said, my voice steady as steel. "An hour ago, someone used the same IP address to try again after I warned you. That is not a misunderstanding. That is intent." He didn't respond. "I will not speak to you again tonight," I continued. "If you have something to say, you may say it through an attorney." "You wouldn't," he whispered. I ended the call. The night air felt sharper now, cleaner, like something had been cut away. As I drove home, I passed the small bakery on Main Street, the one that sells cardamom rolls on Thursdays. Life continued as usual. People laughed inside restaurants. Porch lights glowed warm against the dark. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that made me pause. My mailbox was open. I always close it. I stepped out of the car slowly and walked toward it. Inside, nothing but a single envelope addressed to me in Daniel's handwriting. I hadn't told him I was coming home. I didn't touch the envelope right away. I stood there in the quiet of my driveway, the porch light humming faintly above me, and stared at Daniel's handwriting. I would recognize it anywhere slanted slightly to the right letters pressed too hard into the paper. He always wrote like he was trying to make the words permanent. I opened the mailbox and took it out carefully as if it might burn. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper folded twice. "Mom, please don't do this. We were going to fix it. The money isn't even spent yet. We just needed time. If this becomes official, it changes everything. Think about the kids. Think about holidays. We can still handle this privately. I'll come over tonight. No apology, no admission, just strategy." At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, Marissa's sharper and more angular escalating. "This will only make you look unstable." I read that line twice. Unstable. At 74, I've balanced checkbooks by hand, navigated probate court, and once assembled a Scandinavian flat-pack arm wire without instructions. But now, I was unstable, because I refused to absorb a felony quietly. I folded the paper back along its original creases and slipped it into my handbag. Evidence. Inside the house, everything felt the same. The ticking clock, the faint scent of rosemary from earlier. But I felt different, lighter, almost like denial had been a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marissa this time. "Eleanor, please be rational. These systems are complicated. You could be misunderstanding what happened." I typed back. "The police understand it very clearly. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. You're going to regret this." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to my small desk near the window and powered up my laptop. I logged into my bank again. All accounts secure. Freeze confirmed. Fraud alert active. I checked my credit monitoring dashboard. Another attempted soft inquiry had been blocked 15 minutes ago. They were still trying. That told me something important. They didn't believe I would follow through. At 8:12 p.m., headlights swept across my living room wall. Daniel's SUV. He didn't knock this time. He rang the bell and kept his finger on it a fraction too long. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "We need to talk," he said, voice tight. "We can talk here." He glanced over my shoulder. "Can I come in?" "No." He swallowed. The night air was cold and his breath fogged faintly. "Mom, you're spiraling," he began. "You've always been intense, but this is intense," I repeated calmly. "Because I reported identity theft." He ran a hand through his hair again. I noticed how tired he looked. Not remorseful, tired of managing the situation. "We needed liquidity," he said suddenly. "Just short term. The interest rate was good because of your credit. We were going to transfer it to our name after a few months. You can't transfer fraud," I said. He shifted his weight. "You don't get it. Banks don't care about families. They just care about payments. And you assumed I would quietly make them," I replied. He didn't deny it. Behind him, another car door slammed. Marissa stepped out from the passenger side and walked up the driveway, arms folded tightly across her chest. "This is absurd," she said without greeting. "Do you know what an investigation like this does? Employers see this. Background checks, flag things." "They should," I answered. "You're willing to jeopardize your son's career over paperwork. I'm unwilling to jeopardize my future over theft." She let out a sharp laugh. "You think they'll arrest someone over this? It's a family misunderstanding." The officer did not use the word misunderstanding, I said evenly. He used the word felony. Daniel shot her a look. Fear now unmistakable. "You actually filed it as criminal?" he asked. "Yes." Marissa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you push this, we will have to defend ourselves. We have emails. We have proof you agreed to financial help. I agreed to nothing. I said, you forget conversations." She pressed. "You get emotional. We could easily demonstrate diminished capacity." There it was, the threat behind the word unstable. I felt something settle inside me, then not anger, resolution. "If you attempt to question my capacity," I said quietly, "you will find I have already scheduled a cognitive assessment next week with my physician voluntarily." Daniel's eyes widened. "You did what I anticipated that angle." For the first time, neither of them had a response ready. A car slowed at the end of the street, headlights washing over us briefly before continuing on. The neighborhood was quiet, watching perhaps. Daniel's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at it and went pale. What Marissa demanded. He didn't answer, just handed her the phone. Her face drained of color, too. I watched them both. "What is it?" I asked calmly. Daniel looked up at me, voice barely above a whisper. "They just froze our joint account." For a moment, none of us spoke. The porch light flickered again, humming softly. And in that thin yellow glow, I watched my son process something he had never truly believed would happen. Consequences. "What do you mean, froze?" I asked evenly. Daniel swallowed. "Our checking account, it's locked. There's a notice saying it's under review for suspicious activity. Marissa grabbed the phone from him and scrolled frantically. "This is because of you," she snapped at me. "You triggered internal flags." "Everything's connected." "Yes," I replied. "Fraud systems tend to connect things." She looked like she wanted to scream, but instead she turned on Daniel. "I told you we should have waited." "You said it was fine," he shot back. I said not after she noticed. I let them unravel for a few seconds before speaking. "You attempted another inquiry after I confronted you," I said. "Did you think that would go unnoticed?" Daniel ran both hands over his face. "We were trying to secure a backup if the first one got delayed." "Delayed," I repeated. He stopped. The word had slipped out too naturally. Marissa's voice dropped lower, now colder. "You could still fix this. Withdraw the complaint. Tell them you were mistaken." I was not mistaken. "They'll ask why you changed your mind," she pressed. "You can say you misunderstood the application process." "I did not misunderstand," I said. Daniel stepped closer to me, desperation edging into his tone. "Mom, listen. Once this goes further, it's not just about money, it's criminal. There will be records, court headlines if someone picks it up. The kids. You used the kids when you needed leverage." I interrupted quietly. "Do not use them now." He flinched. Behind them, the neighbor across the street opened her curtains slightly. I could see the faint outline of her silhouette. Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, but truth travels faster when there's paperwork. Marissa suddenly straightened. "Fine," she said. "If you want to play this game, let's play it. We have emails where you sent us copies of your tax returns last year. Yes, you gave us access to your financial information. For filing assistance, not borrowing rights." She crossed her arms. "You're splitting hairs." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm distinguishing between trust and theft." Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another notification, his jaw tightened as he read it. "What now?" I asked. "They want us to come in tomorrow," he muttered. "The bank in person." "For what purpose?" I asked. "They said clarification of linked accounts." Linked. That word landed heavily. Marissa's eyes snapped to me. "You reported our account too." "I reported fraudulent routing," I said. "If your account received funds tied to my identity, that is part of the investigation." Daniel let out a low curse under his breath. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "This is traceable." For the first time, fear outweighed arrogance in his expression. Real fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes the system they thought they could outmaneuver is bigger than they imagined. Marissa tried one last angle. Her voice softened artificially. "Eleanor," she said, stepping closer again, "families recover from mistakes. You don't have to destroy everything. We can pay you back quietly. No one else has to know." I held her gaze steadily. "Everyone already knows," I said. "The lender, the credit bureaus, law enforcement, and now your bank." Daniel looked like he might sit down on the driveway. "You actually want to see us arrested?" he asked hoarsely. "I want to see this stopped," I replied. There was a difference, a large one. Headlights appeared at the end of the street again, but this time they slowed much slower. A vehicle turned onto our block deliberately. Daniel noticed it too. His shoulders stiffened. The car rolled forward unhurried. Marissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "Daniel." The vehicle pulled up along the curb, engine idling. I didn't move. Daniel looked at me, panic finally breaking through his composure. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "Exactly what happened." I answered. The car doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of the car. Not hurried, not aggressive, just purposeful. Daniel's breath shortened beside me. Marissa's fingers dug into his arm so tightly I could see the tension in her knuckles. "Evening," the older officer said, walking up the driveway. He looked at me first. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes. We received additional activity alerts connected to your report. I assumed you might." Daniel tried to speak, but his voice came out thinner than usual. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. Family matter." The younger officer glanced between us. "Sir, are you Daniel Whitmore?" Daniel hesitated a fraction too long. Yes. And this is your residence? Yes. The older officer nodded slightly. We'll need to ask you a few questions regarding a financial application submitted under Mrs. Whitmore's identity. Marissa stepped forward immediately. This is absurd. She's elderly. She gets confused. We were helping her consolidate accounts. The officer looked at me again. Ma'am, do you feel confused about your report? No, I said calmly. I have documentation. I handed him copies I'd printed earlier, email confirmations, timestamps. The attempted phone number changed the freeze confirmations. He scanned them quickly. Daniel shifted on his feet. We can explain, please do, the officer said evenly. There was a long pause. Marissa spoke first. A Liliner gave us access to her information last year for taxes. We handled paperwork. We may have initiated something on her behalf to improve her financial positioning. Without her signature, the officer asked. It was online, she replied quickly. And without her knowledge, we were going to tell her. The younger officer typed something into a small device. Sir, were the loan proceeds deposited into an account? You control, Daniel's silence answered before he did. The older officer's tone shifted slightly, not harsh but firm. Mr. Whitmore, at this point, we are investigating potential identity theft and fraud over a threshold amount. Continued activity was recorded after the initial complaint. Marissa's head snapped toward Daniel. You said they couldn't trace it that fast. Daniel shot her a look of warning. Too late. The younger officer glanced up. Trace what, ma'am? No, I mean. Daniel tried again. Look, we were under pressure. It was temporary. We planned to repay. Repayment doesn't negate unauthorized use, the officer replied. I watched my son's face carefully. The arrogance was gone now. What remained was calculation and fear. The older officer turned to me. Mrs. Whitmore, are you requesting to proceed with formal charges? The question landed heavy in the night air. Daniel looked at me like a drowning man. Mom, please. Marissa's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. If you do this, you will not see your grandchildren again. There it was, the final card. For a brief second, my chest tightened, not because I doubted the truth, but because I knew the cost of it. The porch light flickered again above us, buzzing softly. I straightened my shoulders. Yes, I said clearly. I want this investigated fully. The older officer nodded once. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, he said to Daniel and Marissa. We'll need you to come down to the station for questioning. Marissa's composure shattered. You can't arrest us over paperwork. At this time, the officer replied evenly, you are being detained for further inquiry. Daniel stepped back instinctively. This is insane. She's my mother, and she is the victim listed on the report. The younger officer said the neighborhood had gone completely still. Curtains shifted subtly. Someone's porch light turned on down the street. Daniel looked at me one last time. You're choosing this over us. No, I answered quietly. You chose this. The officers guided them toward the patrol car, not with force, but with finality. As the car doors closed, Marissa's eyes met mine through the window, not pleading now. Furious, the engine started. I stood alone in my driveway as the vehicle pulled away slowly. My phone buzzed again in my hand. A new notification from the lender. Fraud case escalated. Law enforcement involvement confirmed. The patrol car disappeared at the end of the street, its red tail lights fading into the dark like a slow exhale. I didn't move for several seconds. The neighborhood was quiet again. Too quiet. Curtains shifted back into place. Porch lights clicked off one by one. I walked inside and locked the door carefully. My house felt larger now, emptier, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I set my handbag on the kitchen table and removed the folded letter Daniel had left in the mailbox. I smoothed it flat and slid it into a clear plastic sleeve. Evidence. I labeled it with the date and time. My handwriting was steady. At 9:43 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore. A calm male voice asked, Yes. This is Officer Ramirez. Your son and daughter-in-law are at the station. They've requested counsel. We're processing documentation. We may need you tomorrow to formally identify specific materials related to your financial records. I'll be there, I said. There was a slight pause. Ma'am, I understand this isn't easy. No, I replied quietly. It isn't. After the call ended, I poured myself a small glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. My reflection in the dark window looked older than this morning, but also sharper, defined. At 10:07 p.m., another notification arrived, a freeze confirmation from the credit union account ending in 4421. The account that had received the loan funds, it was officially under investigation. I opened my laptop and logged into my credit monitoring dashboard again. A detailed alert now displayed a timeline of events: initial application approval, fund transfer, attempted modification of contact number, second inquiry, and IP flagging. The IP address was listed in full. I copied it down. It matched the general location of Daniel's house. I leaned back slowly in my chair. They hadn't even used a public network. They'd used their home connection. Confidence can make people careless. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from an unfamiliar number. Grandma. What's going on? Mom's crying. My heart clenched. It was Olivia, my oldest granddaughter. 14, old enough to sense something serious, too young to understand all of it. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. I love you. I'm handling something important. We'll talk soon. 3 dots appeared. Dad says you're confused. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm not confused, I typed back. I'm protecting myself. No response came after that. I set the phone down carefully. At 11:02 p.m., Daniel called again. I let it ring twice. On the third ring, I answered. His voice was different now. Lower controlled. They're talking about charges, he said. Yes. You could still tell them it was authorized. It wasn't. He inhaled sharply. You're going to tear this family apart. No, I replied quietly. I am refusing to let it be torn quietly. Silence, then softer. Mom, please just say you misunderstood. I looked around my kitchen, the ceramic jar of flour, the rosemary plant by the window, the clock ticking steadily forward. I understood perfectly, I said. There was a long pause on the line. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge entirely. They're saying because there were repeated attempts after the initial complaint, it shows intent. Yes. And because of the amount, it's felony level. Yes. He swallowed audibly. Marissa says, we can fight it. You can try, I answered. Another silence, then something I hadn't expected. I didn't think you'd actually do it, he admitted. That landed harder than anything else. You didn't think I'd protect myself, I asked. I thought you'd handle it quietly. Like always. Like always. I felt the weight of that sentence settle into something solid inside me. I am not handling this quietly, I said. He didn't argue. I'll call you tomorrow, he murmured. I will speak to you through legal channels, I replied. The line went dead. I sat there in the dim kitchen light for a long time after that, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. At 11:48 p.m., one final alert came through. Temporary hold placed on suspect accounts pending further investigation. I turned off the kitchen light and walked slowly down the hallway toward my bedroom. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel something close to exhaustion, but not regret. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm. For years, I've risen early out of habit. First for Daniel when he was small, then for my husband's commute, and now simply because silence belongs to the morning. But this silence felt different charged. I brewed coffee instead of tea, stronger, darker. I added a pinch of cardamom, something I rarely do unless I need grounding. At 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Officer Ramirez, Mrs. Whitmore. Good morning. We'll need you at the station at 10 to review recovered materials and confirm certain documentation. Recovered, I asked. Yes, ma'am. I didn't press further. At 8:04 a.m., a voicemail came through from Marissa. Her voice was brittle. You've made your point. The bank is reviewing everything. The kids are asking questions. If you care about them at all, you'll fix this. Fix this. I deleted the voicemail but kept the audio file saved. Another entry in the folder on my desktop labeled simply Timeline. At 9:47, I drove to the station. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Officer Ramirez met me in a small interview room with beige walls and a single table. On that table were several items sealed in clear evidence bags. My breath slowed. During preliminary questioning, he explained we obtained consent to review devices associated with the application. We also secured documentation from their residence. He laid the first bag in front of me. Inside was a printed copy of my credit report with handwritten notes in the margins. My interest rate circled a calculation scribbled beside it, a line that read, "She won't notice if autopay is set." My chest tightened not with shock, but with confirmation. The second bag contained shredded paper strips reconstructed partially, my name visible, portions of my social security number. The third bag held a small notebook. Daniel's Officer Ramirez opened it carefully and turned it toward me on one page. Loan under mom's credit, $38,000 moved to Joint Act 4-421. Refi later. If questioned, then say consolidation. Help. No ambiguity, no misunderstanding. Can you confirm this is your son's handwriting? He asked. I studied it closely. The pressure marks. The way he forms the letter M. Yes, I said quietly. And the credit report, did you provide this copy to them? No, he nodded slowly. Ma'am, he said gently. Given the documentation and repeated attempts after warning the case will likely proceed formally. I understand. He hesitated, then added. Your daughter-in-law suggested cognitive impairment on your part. We've noted that claim. Your documentation contradicts it. I allowed myself a small breath of satisfaction. I have an appointment scheduled for voluntary assessment, I said, for my own records. He gave a slight nod of respect. At 10:38 a.m., as I was leaving the station, my phone vibrated again. A call from Daniel's number. I didn't answer. A text followed. They're charging us. I stopped walking for a moment. Then another message. This isn't what we thought would happen. Number. It wasn't. I stepped outside into the bright late morning sun. The air felt crisp, clear. As I reached my car, Officer Ramirez stepped out behind me. One more thing, he said. There's an additional detail. Yes, the funds from the loan were partially transferred out of their account last night before the freeze completed. To where? I asked. A secondary account under a different name. I felt something cold move through me. Whose name I asked. He checked his notes. Olivia Whitmore, my granddaughter. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Olivia, I repeated. Yes, ma'am, Officer Ramirez said carefully. A custodial savings account was opened recently. Her name is listed as primary beneficiary. The transfer occurred approximately 23 minutes before the freeze finalized. I felt the air thin around me. Is she legally able to access it? I asked. No, she's a minor. The account would be controlled by a guardian, Daniel or Marissa. The implication was clear. They hadn't just used my credit. They'd tried to move part of the money into an account under their daughter's name, shielded by age. That complicates things, the officer added. It clarifies them, I replied quietly. He studied my face, perhaps expecting tears. Instead, I felt something far more steady. Resolve. Will she face consequences, I asked. No, she's not considered responsible. The account activity will be reviewed as part of the broader case. I nodded once. Thank you. I got into my car and closed the door slowly. For a long moment, I simply sat there staring at the steering wheel. They had used her name. That was the part that hurt. Not the money, not the lies, the fact that they were willing to weave their daughter into a financial scheme as insulation. My phone buzzed again. Daniel, I answered this time. What did you tell them? He demanded, immediately voice. Exactly what happened. They're saying the transfer to Olivia's account makes it look worse. It does, I said evenly. That was just temporary. He snapped. It was a placeholder. We were going to move it back once things settled. You moved stolen funds into your daughter's name. It wasn't stolen, he insisted weakly. It was borrowed. Without consent, I replied. That is theft. There was breathing on the other end. Ragged. Now you don't understand how tight things are, he muttered. Medical bills, credit cards, we were drowning. And your solution, I said quietly, was to push me under first. Silence then softer. They're talking about fraud charges, Mom. Real ones. Yes. They said the notes they found make it premeditated. Yes. A long pause. You read them? He asked. Yes. Another silence, heavier this time. You went through my things, he whispered. The police did, I corrected. After I filed a report, his breath pitched faintly. Marissa thinks if you tell them you were considering helping us, it changes intent. I was not considering it. She says you've always supported us. I have, I said voluntarily. The distinction seemed to land. They froze Olivia's account, too, he added quietly. I know. She's scared. So am I replied. He didn't respond to that. Daniel, I said, keeping my voice steady. Did Olivia know no? He said quickly. Of course not. I closed my eyes briefly. Good. That account will be untangled, I continued. But this will not disappear. He let out a long, uneven breath. You really won't fix it. I am fixing it, I said properly. There was nothing left for him to argue. I have to go, he muttered. Yes. When the call ended, I drove home slowly. Every stoplight felt deliberate, every turn heavier. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. A small car parked across the street unfamiliar. Inside, a woman sat in the driver's seat with a folder on her lap. When she saw me looking, she stepped out and approached. Mrs. Whitmore, she asked. Yes, I'm from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you regarding a financial account opened in your granddaughter's name. I didn't invite her inside immediately. The words Child Protective Services seemed to echo longer than they should have. I'm not sure why you'd need to speak with me, I said evenly. She held up her folder. A financial account was opened in Olivia Whitmore's name. Funds were transferred into it under circumstances currently under investigation. We're conducting a standard welfare assessment. Standard nothing about this felt standard. You believe she's in danger? I asked. We're assessing whether financial exploitation or coercion is involved, she replied carefully, including potential misuse of a minor's identity. I stepped aside then and allowed her into my living room. We sat across from each other. She took notes as I explained clearly chronologically what had happened. The fraudulent loan, the second inquiry, the transfer into Olivia's custodial account. Did Olivia have any knowledge of this? She asked. No, I said firmly. I asked directly. And her parents? They claimed it was temporary. She made a small notation. Do you believe your granddaughter is being used to shield financial misconduct? The question was clinical precise. Yes, I answered. She studied my face carefully as though searching for confusion. She didn't find it. Your son's attorney has already contacted us, she added. Of course he had. What was the claim, I asked? That you are misinterpreting financial assistance and that your cognitive health is in question. I nodded slowly. I anticipated that. Her pen paused. You anticipated it. I have a voluntary cognitive evaluation scheduled next week. I also provided law enforcement with detailed documentation. She closed the folder briefly and leaned back. You understand that if misuse of a minor's identity is confirmed, it escalates the situation significantly. Yes. She hesitated, then asked more softly, Are you prepared for the impact that could have on your family? The room felt still heavy. Before I answered, I felt the weight of that question not legally, but emotionally. And this is where I want to pause for just a moment. This is the moment everything shifts, isn't it? a grandmother standing at the line between family and justice. If you were in Ella Lanner's place right now, would you stay silent or step forward? Tell me in the comments. I looked back at the woman in front of me. My granddaughter deserves a future unburdened by fraud, I said quietly. If that means the truth causes discomfort, then so be it. She nodded once. CPS will interview the children separately, she said. We'll determine whether this was an isolated financial event or part of a broader pattern. Pattern. That word lingered. Officer Ramirez mentioned there were notes recovered. She added, if those indicate premeditation involving the minor's account, that will factor into our report. They do, I replied. Her eyes sharpened slightly. When she stood to leave, she handed me a card. If anyone pressures you to retract your statement, she said, notify us. Retaliation in these cases is taken seriously. I will, I answered. After she left, the house felt different again. Not emptier this time, but clearer. Layers were being stripped away. Truth had a way of disinfecting rot even when it stung. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel's attorney. We request that you reconsider pursuing charges. A family mediation could resolve this without permanent damage. Permanent damage. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. Some damage had already been permanent. The next morning began with a knock on my door at 8:16 a.m. Not Daniel, not Marissa. 2 detectives. They weren't in uniform this time. Plain clothes, leather folders, calm expressions that meant something had shifted from inquiry to procedure. Mrs. Whitmore. One of them said, showing a badge, "We have additional updates regarding the custodial account." I stepped aside and let them in. We sat at the kitchen table again. The same table where I'd once helped Daniel with math homework. The same table where I'd hosted birthday cakes and Thanksgiving pies and arguments about curfews. Now it held printed transaction logs. The transfer into your granddaughter's account was structured in 2 smaller amounts, the detective explained. Below certain internal reporting thresholds, I felt my jaw tighten slightly. That suggests intent to avoid immediate detection. Yes, I said quietly. He slid another document toward me. This was drafted on Daniel's laptop. 2 days before the loan was approved, I read it. Contingency plan, if flagged, move $12,000 to Olivia Savings. Claim college prep. Shift remainder to cover card debt. There it was. Not desperation in the moment. Planning. Do you recognize this? The detective asked. Yes. Did you at any point authorize your son or daughter-in-law to open a line of credit in your name? No. Did you authorize any transfer of funds into Olivia's account? No. He nodded once and made a notation. The second detective leaned forward slightly. We also recovered deleted messages between Daniel and Marissa, discussing timing the application for when you typically watch television and wouldn't check email. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course you understand. He continued carefully that misuse of a minor's identity, combined with financial fraud, elevates the charges. I do. And you wish to proceed? Yes. There was no hesitation in my voice now, none left. After they left, I sat at the table for a long time. The word that kept repeating in my mind wasn't betrayal. It was calculation. They hadn't acted in panic. They had acted in stages. Application, transfer, backup inquiry, secondary transfer narrative, preparation, confused, unstable misunderstanding. I stood and walked to the window. The rosemary bush swayed lightly in the breeze outside. Ordinary morning, ordinary light. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was Olivia. Grandma CPS came to school today. I felt my chest tighten. They asked me about the savings account. I told them I didn't know about it. I typed carefully. You did exactly right. You're not in trouble. A pause. Dad says you're trying to hurt us. I stared at that sentence. Then I responded. I'm trying to protect what's right, even when it's hard. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then one final message. Are you mad at me? That one hit deeper than anything else had. Never, I typed back. I love you. No reply came after that. At 12:34 p.m., Daniel called again. I let it go to voicemail. His message came through seconds later. They're offering a plea arrangement, he said, voice tight. If you agree not to pursue civil damages, they'll consider reduced charges. We'd admit to unauthorized use, not full fraud. Unauthorized use. Such a gentle phrase for something so deliberate. He continued, if you push for full prosecution, it gets worse for everyone. I listened to the message twice before deleting it. Then I opened my notebook and wrote one line. They want containment, not accountability. At 2:10 p.m., my attorney called. Yes, I had hired one that morning. Eleanor. She said, her voice calm and direct. The documentation is strong. The involvement of a minor account significantly limits their room to argue misunderstanding. I assumed as much. There will be pressure to settle quietly. She added, I'm aware. Are you emotionally prepared for this to go to court? I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the clock at the window, at the chair Daniel once sat in. Yes, I said. After we ended the call, I made myself a sandwich. I didn't taste and sat back down at the table. For the first time since this began, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth plainly. My son had not thought I would act. He had built a plan around my silence, and that plan was collapsing. The formal charges were filed 3 days later. Fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation involving a minor account. I learned about it not from Daniel, but from the public court record notification that landed in my email at 9:02 a.m. Clear, official, irreversible. At 9:17, Daniel called. I answered. They filed it, he said flatly. Yes. You didn't even try to stop it. It wasn't mine to stop, I replied. Once reported, it became a matter of law. You could have told them you didn't want to cooperate. I did cooperate, I said calmly. Silence. Then anger rising. You're enjoying this? No, I said quietly. I'm enduring it. That seemed to unsettle him more than if I'd shouted. You've humiliated us, he went on. Neighbors are talking. My supervisor asked questions. You humiliated yourself, I answered. He inhaled sharply. Marissa's parents are threatening to cut us off. They think this makes us look criminal. I didn't respond to that because they were. He lowered his voice. The plea offer is still open. If you agree not to pursue civil damages, they'll recommend probation instead of potential jail time. And if I refuse, it goes to trial. There, it was the dividing line. I'm not seeking revenge, I said slowly, but I will not rewrite what happened. You're being stubborn. No, I replied. I'm being consistent. A long silence followed. Then something different entered his voice. Not anger this time. Fear. They're saying the notes make it premeditated. That the transfer under Olivia's name shows intent to conceal. Yes, I didn't think it would go this far, he admitted quietly. You thought I'd absorb it, I said. He didn't deny it. You've always fixed things, he continued. Smooth them over, quietly handled it. I fixed scraped knees, I said softly. Not crimes. Another silence. Mom, if I go to court, this follows me forever. And if I had stayed silent, I replied it would have followed me. The line went quiet again. When he spoke next, the sharpness was gone entirely. I don't know how we got here, he murmured. I do, I said, and I did. Not in one decision, not in one desperate moment, in layers, in small rationalizations, in the assumption that I would never push back. After the call ended, I drove to my attorney's office. She laid out the options clearly. If I agreed not to pursue civil recovery beyond restitution, the prosecution might support reduced sentencing. If I insisted on full accountability, the case would likely proceed to court with all documentation presented. The evidence is strong, she repeated, especially the written plan and the minor account transfer. I nodded emotionally, she added. This will divide your family. It already has, I said. When I left her office, I didn't drive home immediately. I stopped at the bakery on Main Street instead. The woman behind the counter smiled warmly. Cardamom roll today. Yes, I said. I sat by the window with my coffee and pastry watching people pass by. Ordinary lives, ordinary choices. My phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. Dad says we might move. I closed my eyes briefly before replying. Wherever you are, you can always call me. A few seconds later, Mom's crying a lot. I typed carefully. Adults sometimes cry when consequences feel heavy. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. No response. I finished my coffee slowly. By the time I returned home, I had made my decision. I called my attorney. I will not pursue additional civil damages, I said. Restitution only, but I will not interfere with prosecution. She paused. You're certain, yes. I would not destroy them beyond what they had done, but I would not shield them either. That evening, Daniel texted, they're offering probation if we accept the plea. I stared at the message for a long time before answering. That choice is yours. He didn't reply. For the first time since this began, the outcome was no longer in my hands. It was in theirs. They accepted the plea. I found out on a gray Tuesday afternoon when my attorney called. Daniel and Marissa have agreed to plead to reduced felony charges, she said. Probation, mandatory restitution, financial monitoring, and required counseling. No jail time provided they comply. I stood by the window as she spoke, watching a delivery truck crawl past my house. And Olivia, I asked. The custodial account has been dissolved. Funds recovered. No record attached to her. I closed my eyes briefly. Good. The court date is set for formal entry next week, she continued. You'll need to be present to confirm restitution terms. I will be. After we ended the call, I sat down slowly. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter. Finality. My phone buzzed 15 minutes later. Daniel, I answered. We signed it, he said. I know. His voice sounded thinner than I'd ever heard it. Stripped down. They're putting us on supervised probation financial audits counseling. We have to disclose any new credit applications. Yes, they made us admit to intent. I didn't respond immediately. They said because of the notes and the transfers, there was no way to frame it as confusion. He continued. No, I said quietly. There wasn't silence, then softer. You didn't fight for us. I chose not to fight against the truth, I replied. He exhaled slowly. Marissa thinks you'll regret this. I regret that it happened, I said, not that it stopped. Another silence. We're selling the house, he added. I hadn't expected that to cover legal costs and debts, he said. We can't afford to stay. I stared at the rosemary bush outside my window. That is your decision, I replied. We might move closer to her parents. I understand. There was something almost hollow in his tone now. They made us take financial responsibility classes, he added quietly, like teenagers. That might have helped earlier, I said before I could stop myself. He didn't argue. I didn't think you'd let it go this far, he admitted again. That was your first mistake, I replied gently. The call ended without goodbye. That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same place everything had begun. I thought about the small calculations that had led here. The assumption that I was predictable, that I would absorb harm quietly to preserve peace, that my age meant weakness. They had miscalculated, not because I am cruel, but because I am finished being convenient. My phone buzzed once more. Olivia. Dad says it's over. It's handled, I replied. A pause. Are you still coming to my recital next month? I felt something soften in my chest. Yes, I typed. I wouldn't miss it. 3 dots appeared. Then okay. No drama, no accusation, just okay. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. The court hearing lasted 23 minutes. I know because I checked the clock when it began and again when it ended. Daniel and Marissa stood side by side at the front of the room, not touching, not speaking. Just 2 adults facing consequences they once believed they could outmaneuver. When the judge read the charges aloud, fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation involving misuse of a minor's account, The words felt clinical, clean stripped of emotion. Daniel kept his eyes forward. Marissa looked down. They both entered their plea. Guilty. Hearing it spoken out loud did something strange inside me. It didn't bring satisfaction. It didn't bring triumph. It brought clarity. The judge outlined probation terms, restitution payments, mandatory financial oversight, counseling requirements, strict conditions, zero tolerance for further violations. Then she turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you confirm that restitution arrangements are acceptable?" "Yes," I said. My voice did not shake. The gavel came down lightly. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Daniel approached me slowly, not with anger this time, not with pressure, with something closer to humility. I signed everything he said quietly. "I know. I'll pay it back." "Yes." There was a long pause between us. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," he said one last time. That I replied was the problem. Marissa stayed a few steps behind him. She didn't speak to me. She didn't need to. Some conversations don't require repetition. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I had won everything, but because I had finally refused to disappear quietly. 2 months later, they moved out. The house down the street went dark for a while, then sold to a young couple with a golden retriever and music that spilled onto the sidewalk every Saturday. Life moved in where trouble had left. That is what neighborhoods do. They keep going. Olivia still calls me. Not every day, not even every week, but enough. I went to her recital. She did not bring up the case, and neither did I. Some things do not need to be pulled apart to be understood. The restitution payments started arriving on time. Small amounts, automatic, cold. Each one a quiet reminder that choices leave records behind. And I went back to my ordinary life. Morning tea, trimming rosemary, cardamom rolls on Thursdays when I felt like baking. But I was not the same woman. I was still a grandmother, still 74, still living in the same house, drinking from the same chipped Wedgwood cup. But I was no longer the quiet answer to someone else's problems. 6 months later, the final restitution payment cleared. I wrote it down in my burgundy notebook, looked at the page for a moment, then closed it. Sometimes standing up for yourself costs comfort. Sometimes it costs closeness. Sometimes it changes the way people see you. I will not tell you whether Eleanor was right or wrong, but I will tell you this. Silence is not always kindness, and protecting your peace is not the same as being cruel.
Thank you for staying with me until this point. Please comment number 1 so I know you're still here with me. Before we continue, here's a quick note. The next story contains some fictional elements and is created for entertainment and reference purposes only. Thank you for your support and for being here.
I walked into my daughter's wedding knowing one terrifying truth. If I followed what my heart was begging me to do, I would destroy her perfect day in front of everyone she loved. But if I stayed silent, I might lose her forever. The organ was already playing when I slipped through the side entrance, a garment bag draped over my arm. My heels made almost no sound against the polished tile, but every step felt heavy, like I was walking toward a decision I could never take back. The sanctuary was full. Soft-colored dresses, polite smiles, white flowers, golden light. Everything looked peaceful, almost holy, but I knew better. Sometimes the most beautiful rooms hide the ugliest truths. I kept my face calm as I moved down the aisle. I had learned long ago that mothers do not get the luxury of falling apart when their children are about to make a mistake that could change their entire life. So I walked like everything was normal, like I was only there to sit in the front pew, smile for the guests, and watch my daughter marry a man who looked perfect in a suit and knew exactly how to charm a room. My name is Odessa Rivers. And that day, I was supposed to give my daughter away. People touched my arm as I passed. "You look beautiful. The flowers are stunning. You must be so proud." I smiled. I nodded. I answered gently because none of them knew what I was carrying inside. They saw a mother at her daughter's wedding. They did not see a woman trying to decide whether saving her child meant breaking her heart. The front pew was waiting for me, marked with a ribbon and a small card that read, "Mother of the Bride." Those words should have felt like an honor. Instead, they felt like a weight. Because being the mother of the bride meant I was supposed to be graceful, quiet, supportive. It meant I was expected to keep every fear locked behind my smile. But as I sat down clutching that garment bag beside me, I knew one thing for certain. Before this wedding ended, the truth would have to come out. I sat, smoothed my skirt, folded my hands, and then I saw her. Ribera Bennett stood near the altar, straight back, surveying the room like someone checking the condition of property she expected to walk away with. When our eyes met, her smile arrived late and stopped short of anything warm. She kissed my cheek, light and dry. Odessa. She said, stretching my name like it belonged to her mouth now. "Everything looks lovely." I thanked her and turned away. I did not comment on the way her eyes kept moving. I did not comment on how she spoke like a woman who already knew the ending of a story the rest of us were still reading. My phone buzzed once inside my clutch. A vendor confirmation, nothing urgent, I ignored it. Across the aisle, Reese Bennett laughed with one of his groomsmen, shoulders easy posture, relaxed, the kind of man who photographs well. He caught my glance and offered a confident smile. I returned something polite. From a distance, charm and sincerity can look exactly the same. Behind the sanctuary doors, my daughter Nyla was being zipped into her dress. My daughter, who believed that love meant safety. My daughter, who always gave more than she guarded. My daughter, who thought marriage was the place where you finally stopped being afraid. The coordinator whispered that we were on schedule. The officiant gave me a small nod as he passed. Everything was moving the way weddings are supposed to move. Quietly, efficiently, beautifully. And yet something inside me would not settle. Not fear, exactly something colder. Something older. The kind of instinct you get when you have lived long enough to recognize when a room is too perfect. Right here, before I go any further, if you're watching this from your living room, your kitchen, or your phone on a break at work, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Some stories deserve witnesses. A woman behind me leaned forward and whispered, "Your daughter is going to be such a beautiful bride." I thanked her. I did not tell her that beauty was not what worried me. The music shifted. The cue that the processional was close. The doors at the back of the church stood ready. I stood slowly, gracefully, the way mothers are expected to stand when they remember a small detail that no one else can handle. I told the woman beside me that I needed to check one last thing before the ceremony began. She smiled and nodded like this was all part of the plan. I stepped out of the sanctuary and into the side hall. The organ faded into a soft echo behind me. The air changed cooler, quieter, and then I heard it. Not the nervous laughter of bridesmaids, not the hushed voices of coordinators. A woman's laugh, low, sharp, careless, drifted down the hallway ahead of me, the kind of laugh that doesn't belong in a church, the kind that sounds like someone who already believes the ending is theirs. It cut off suddenly like whoever made it remembered where they were. I stopped walking just for a second. My hand tightened around my clutch. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself this was not the day for suspicion, not the day for instincts, not the day to see ghosts where there were none. Then I took another step toward the corner of the hall because whatever was waiting on the other side of that wall was already laughing inside my daughter's future. I slowed before I reached the corner because the voices were too comfortable for a wedding day. Not the quick, nervous chatter of people fixing buttons and nerves. This was low, amused private like the building belonged to them. The hallway narrowed there, lined with framed church photos and a small table holding programs stacked neatly in rows. I could see the edge of a doorway ahead, half closed, and the sound was coming from inside it, soft enough that anyone walking fast would miss it, clear enough that anybody standing still would hear every syllable. I stood still. The air smelled like starch and flowers and something bitter in the back of my throat. I recognized Roberta's voice first because she carried her words like a purse tight grip, no swinging. "Keep your face sweet," she was saying, and there was a smile in it. "Don't look eager. Men who look eager look guilty." A man chuckled, That chuckle had the same careless edge as the laugh that hit me at the door. "I know how to play it," he said. "She eats up gentle. You've seen her?" Roberta made a little sound of approval. "Nyla is emotional. That's not an insult. That's a tool. You just have to handle it correctly." I felt my shoulders go stiff, not because I didn't believe my daughter could be emotional, but because of the way that word was used, like she was a lock and they had the right key. Ray's tone shifted casual, almost bored, like he was talking about weather. "She doesn't really understand money," he said. "She understands love. She understands romance. She understands we're building something together. That's what she wants to believe." Roberta laughed softly. "And her mother," she said, and the way she said "mother" made my skin tighten. "Her mother understands money." Ree gave a low hum. "Odessa Rivers didn't get to 50 million by being sentimental." He said, "That woman's got everything wrapped up tight. She smiles. She plays nice, but she counts everything." Roberta's voice sharpened, pleased. "Which is why you don't argue with her. You don't challenge her. You let her think you respect her." Ree sounded amused. "I do respect her," he said. And the next part was what made my stomach drop because it was said like a compliment. "She's the whole point." Roberta's laugh came again, and I could picture her mouth the way it barely opened when she smiled. "Just remember," she said, "marriage changes access. People act like love is the key, but it's paperwork. It's positioning. It's time." Ree let out a breath that sounded like impatience. "I'm not stupid," he said. "I know how it works." Roberta lowered her voice like she was leaning closer to him. "Then say it," she told him, almost teasing. "Say what you're really thinking. Say it out loud so you stop pretending even to yourself." There was a pause, half a second of silence that felt like a door opening. Then Ree spoke, and he didn't sound angry. He sounded certain. "That girl is so naive," he said, and my heart went so hard against my ribs it felt like it might bruise. "I'm only after the money. Her mom is worth 50 million. Roberta laughed, not shocked, not offended, pleased, like he'd finally said the correct answer. Reese chuckled too, and I heard a soft rustle-like fabric moving, like he was adjusting his cufflinks or straightening his jacket. "You're not after her," Roberta said, smiling through the words. "You're after what comes with her." Ree answered like it was obvious. "Neela is the door," he said. "Odessa is the house." Roberta gave another quiet laugh. "Then you make sure the door doesn't close," she murmured. "Not before you're inside." My fingers curled around my clutch so tight the metal clasp bit into my palm. For a moment, my body tried to betray me. My knees went light. My vision sharpened too much, the edges of the hallway turning hard and bright. I could have stepped around the corner right then. I could have walked into that room with my church face still on and exposed them in one breath. But something colder than anger held me still. If I moved too soon, they'd turn it into confusion, into exaggeration, into my word against theirs. They'd tell Nyla her mother was overreacting on her wedding day. They'd play wounded. They'd play innocent. They'd make my daughter choose between her mother's alarm and her groom's performance. And I knew how badly Nyla wanted today to be real. So I pressed my back into the wall beside the programs, held my breath until my lungs stung, and I stayed right there in the church hall, letting them talk, letting them believe their laughter was private, because I needed to hear what else they planned to take. I stayed pressed to that wall until my pulse stopped thooing in my ears like a warning drum. Inside that room, Ree and Roberta kept talking with the relaxed confidence of people who think the world is built for them. Roberta's voice softened into something almost maternal, the way a woman sounds when she's teaching a son how to hold a fork at the right angle. "You don't rush," she told him. "You don't show your hand. The day is the day. After the day comes the rest." Ree made a small sound, impatient but obedient. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking her for anything today." Roberta laughed again, low and satisfied. "Exactly. Today you're the devoted husband. Today you look into her eyes and make everybody believe you. There was a pause, and I could picture Reese's face, the handsome one people smiled at, the one my daughter had probably kissed 1,000 times thinking she was safe. And after he asked, like he already knew, but wanted to hear it said, Roberta answered with the kind of certainty that comes from planning. After you start small, she said, you don't say, give me half. You say, let's simplify. You say, we're married now. We shouldn't have separate anything. You say it's just easier if my name is on things too. Ree chuckled. She'll do it, he said. Nyla hates conflict. She'll call it romance. Roberta's tone sharpened, pleased with herself. And Odessa. She said, Odessa will hate it. Your job is to make Odessa irrelevant. My stomach turned again, not because I didn't understand what she meant, but because I did. In that one sentence, Roberta showed me the entire shape of their plan. Isolate my daughter emotionally, soften her boundaries, and turn me into the villain for having any concern. Ree exhaled like a man settling into a chair he believed belonged to him. Once we're married, he said, everything changes. People can't keep treating me like I'm temporary. Her friends, her family, they'll have to accept me. Roberta made a dismissive sound. Acceptance isn't the prize, she told him. Access is. Ree laughed, and it wasn't nervous, it was greedy. I'm not even being unreasonable, he said. It's not like I'm asking Odessa to hand me a check, Roberta replied. You don't need a check when you can get your name on the right things. Ray's voice lowered like he was savoring it. Once my name is tied to her, he said, everything Odessa built. It's not just hers anymore. Nayla becomes my wife. That means I become family, and family doesn't get locked out. Roberta hummed approval. That's the language, she said. That's how you make it sound moral, like you're not taking, like you're joining. I felt my jaw tighten so hard. My teeth ached. They weren't talking about love. They weren't talking about two people building a life. They were talking about a structure. Like my daughter was a bridge they were about to cross to get to the other side. My mind did what it always does when I'm threatened. It started organizing. Reese wasn't planning to rob Nyla in a mask. He was planning to marry her and let the legal and social weight of that word husband do the heavy lifting. Roberta wasn't telling him to commit a crime. She was telling him how to commit entitlement. And don't forget, Roberta said, and her voice shifted into something sharper, something older. Odessa is proud. Odessa likes control. You don't fight her control head on. You make Nyla feel guilty for letting her mother have a say. Ray's let out a satisfied breath. Neela already thinks her mom doesn't like me, he said. I've been feeding that a little. The casual cruelty of that landed worse than the money line. It meant he'd been laying this track for a while quietly while my daughter tried to please him. Roberta laughed softly. Good, she said. Because once Nyla's married, Odessa's opinion becomes interference. And when a woman is in love, she'll call interference toxicity. My throat went tight. I had seen this happen to women not just in dramatic stories people tell online, but in quiet real life, where a bright daughter becomes smaller year by year, because the man beside her keeps moving the line of what she should tolerate. In that hallway, standing in church clothes with my clutch biting into my palm, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just after my money, they were after my daughter's mind. If they could reshape what she believed about loyalty, about marriage, about family, then they wouldn't need to break into anything. She would open the door herself and call it love. Ray's voice lifted again, smug. Once the ring is on her finger, he said, It's done. She'll follow through. She always does. Roberta answered, smiling through every word. Then make sure she walks down that aisle, she said. Because if she walks, you win. I swallowed hard, staring at the carpet runner, like it might steady me, and the truth settled in my chest like a stone. If my daughter walks down that aisle, I lose her to a plan. I eased away from that corner like my body belonged to me, like my legs weren't filled with sand, and I walked back toward the sanctuary with my face arranged in something peaceful. The church air met me again. Flowers fabric the faint heat of too many bodies holding their breath for a pretty moment, and I slipped into the stream of movement like a woman who had stepped out for a simple errand. I nodded at the coordinator when she passed. Let a guest touch my arm. Let Roberta's laughter live behind my ribs without letting it climb onto my face. My eyes found Ree near the front, still smiling, still relaxed, still wearing that clean confidence like it had been pressed into his suit jacket. He glanced up when he saw me return and gave me a look that said, "Everything is fine. We're right on time," as if he was the host and not the man waiting to take my child. I held the look for one polite second, then turned away because staring too long would give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd landed somewhere under my skin. I moved toward the bridal hallway instead, the one marked by a small white sign that said, "Bride Suite" in neat lettering. And the closer I got, the more I felt that familiar ache that comes when you love someone with an open heart in a world full of people who know how to exploit one. Nyla has never been careless with money. She's just careful with feelings, and for her the two don't belong in the same room. She grew up watching me build what we have with discipline, watching me say no when the world offered shortcuts, watching me choose steadiness over sparkle. And she took the lesson. She just took the soft part of it. She learned how to work. She learned how to save. She learned how to stand on her own 2 feet. But she also learned something else, something I never meant to teach her. That love is proven by how much you're willing to give without asking for anything back. When Nyla falls, she falls like she's stepping into water she trusts will hold her up. And she hates the sound of money inside a love story because she thinks it makes the love smaller. She doesn't want to talk about what she has or what I have because she believes that naming it invites greed into the room. And she believes that if she keeps it quiet, she keeps it safe. That's her blind spot. Silence feels like protection to her even when silence is exactly what predators need. I paused outside the suite door and listened. I heard quick voices, a soft sniff, a laugh that broke into tears, and then Nyla's voice thin with nerves and sweetness. "I'm fine," she said like she was trying to convince her own body. "Just fixing my face." I pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. Neela was perched on the edge of a chair, wrapped in white, her hands trembling slightly as she let someone adjust the fabric at her waist. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment her whole face changed the way a child's face changes when they see their mother in a crowded place, relief even on a day that's supposed to be happy. "Mom," she whispered. And she smiled, but it was a smile stretched over nerves. I walked closer, careful not to disturb the small universe in that room, the pins, the perfume, the fragile calm, and I brushed my fingers against her cheek the way I used to when she was little and sick. "You look like yourself," I told her, because that matters more than looking perfect. Nyla let out a breath and leaned into my hand for half a bot second, then pulled back like she didn't want anyone to see her. "Need it. I don't want to mess up my makeup," she said, trying to joke, and I heard the truth under it. She didn't want to mess up the day. Neela is the kind of woman who will hold herself together for other people until her bones start shaking. She looked past me toward the hallway and lowered her voice. "Ray's mom has been intense," she admitted like she was confessing something shameful. "She keeps saying, 'Today is about family and unity and finally being one.'" She rolled her eyes slightly, but her mouth stayed polite. "She's nervous," I said, letting my voice stay soft. Nyla nodded quickly, grateful for an explanation that didn't threaten her dream. "Yeah," she said, "she just wants everything to be right." That was Nyla always translating sharpness into concern, so she wouldn't have to call it what it was. My eyes fell to Nyla's phone on the table beside her screen, lit with a notification that vanished as soon as it appeared. I didn't need to read it to feel the weight of what I already knew. She had been bending for Ree in quiet ways, smoothing his life, making space, paying for problems he called temporary, believing love meant carrying what he refused to carry himself. I looked at my daughter, beautiful, tender. shaking under lace, and a hard truth rose in me like bile. If I walked in here right now and told her bluntly what I heard, she might still walk down that aisle just to prove her love was real. Nyla kept talking small, harmless things about the schedule, about how she hoped the ceremony wouldn't feel rushed, about how she wanted the older ladies in the family to be comfortable in the front rows. And I let her words wash over me while my eyes kept drifting back to that phone on the table like it was a living thing. I didn't touch it. I didn't ask to see it. I simply watched the way Nyla glanced at it without meaning to, the way her gaze snapped back like she'd been trained not to look too long. And I knew that whatever was lighting up that screen had been lighting up her life for a while. When the woman helping her with the dress stepped away to fetch something, Nyla's shoulders slumped a fraction, and the room softened into that brief private space where a bride is still just somebody's daughter. "Mom," Nyla said, lowering her voice, "if anything feels off today, please don't make it a thing. I can't handle a scene." The sentence was quiet, but the plea inside it was loud. She wasn't asking me to be polite. She was asking me to protect her dream, even if it cost her peace. I stepped closer, smoothing the edge of her veil between my fingers, as if I was fixing fabric and not steadying myself. "I'm not here to embarrass you," I said. "I'm here to make sure you're okay." Nyla nodded fast, grateful, then looked away like she didn't want to cry. Her bracelet caught the light when she lifted her hand to dab under her eye. And it wasn't just any bracelet. I had seen that bracelet before months ago when she first started wearing it, trying to act like it had always been hers. I remembered because she'd worn it to dinner at my house, and Ree had been the one to talk about it, not her. He'd leaned back in my chair like he belonged there and said, "She deserves nice things," with that smooth pride that sounded protective until you realized it cost him nothing to say it. Nyla had smiled then, a little too quick, and changed the subject before I could ask how she'd ended up with a bracelet that didn't match her usual taste. My mind pulled at that thread now, and the memories came like receipts sliding across a counter. The temporary problem he'd had last spring. His car suddenly needing expensive repairs right when Nyla was supposed to take a weekend trip with her friends. She didn't go on the trip. She showed up the next week wearing new guilt-like perfume and said, "It's fine, Mom. I wanted to stay home anyway. The Purview, Nick's bid time." Ree miscalculated and came up short on rent after moving out of his old place. And Nyla made it sound romantic. Two people blending lives, early love, smoothing rough edges. The night she mentioned too casually that she'd put her name on a lease to help him out, then immediately added that it wasn't a big deal because it was only until the wedding. The person spaded the way she'd started picking up dinners and calling it partnership, the way she'd stopped talking about her own savings goals and started talking about our future like the word "our" meant she shouldn't ask questions. In the suite, Nyla shifted in the chair, and the movement made her clutch slide open slightly on the table, the clasp loosening just enough to show a corner of paper folded tight. She noticed it at the same time I did and moved quickly, too quickly to cover it with her hand. That was the first real crack, not the paper itself, but the speed of her shame. I didn't pounce. I didn't accuse. I just looked at her gently and said, "Baby, what is that?" Nyla's lips parted like she was about to lie. Then she closed them again and swallowed. Her eyes got wet and she forced a laugh that didn't sound like laughter. "It's nothing," she said. "Just something I needed to sign for the apartment, that's all." Ree said it would be easier if she stopped herself, and the word "easier" hung in the air like a warning label. I kept my voice low. Easier for who Nyla's breath caught. She looked down at her hands, twisting her ring, her engagement ring, like she was trying to twist time back too. "Mom, it was just to help," she whispered. "He needed it. He's been under pressure. He doesn't like asking, but he's proud, and I didn't want him to feel small." There it was. Love made her generous. Pride made him hungry. I didn't need the rest of the sentence to know the rest of the story. He had taken her softness and dressed it up as devotion. He had let her carry weight and call it romance. He had accepted her sacrifice like it was his due, then stood in a church hall and laughed about how naive she was. Nyla blinked hard and looked up at me, trying to read my face the way she used to when she was little, and I was deciding whether to punish her or hug her. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "please, today has to work." I stared at my daughter, beautiful, shaking, desperate for peace, and I finally saw the pattern clear as day. Ree didn't fall in love with Nyla. He studied her, and he used what he learned. I left the bride's suite the same way I entered it. Slow, steady hands, calm, face soft, because panic travels faster than truth, and I couldn't afford either one leaking into the hallway. Nyla stayed behind me, surrounded by white fabric and nervous help, trying to breathe through the shame she hadn't earned. Before I closed the door, I caught her eyes one more time. They were wet wide and pleading in a way that took me straight back to her childhood. Those moments when she wanted me to fix something she couldn't name. I didn't promise anything out loud. Promises make people careless. I just gave her one small nod that meant, stay right here and let me carry what you can't. And then I stepped out and let the door click shut like nothing inside it had changed. The hallway felt colder than it had 10 minutes earlier. The organ music was louder now, the kind that fills a building with certainty, even when the people inside it are not certain at all. A coordinator walked toward me with a clipboard tucked against her chest, eyes scanning my face for any sign of trouble. I gave her none. "We're good," she whispered. I smiled gently. "We're good," I said, and my voice held. The lie tasted like metal, but it was a necessary one. If she heard alarm, she'd run to someone. If she ran to someone, it would reach Roberta. If it reached Roberta, Roberta would reach Ree, and Ree would get ahead of the A story before I could decide what story I needed the room to hear. I walked back into the sanctuary with my shoulders squared, letting the light from the stained glass fall across my dress like blessing. People turned to look at me again, the way they do when they expect a mother to be glowing. And I gave them the version of me they could handle, composed, dignified, present. A few women smiled and mouthed, "Almost time." And I nodded like I was excited too. My hands were steady because my body has always understood one thing. When you are protecting your child, you do not get to fall apart in public. I slid back into my front row seat and placed my clutch in my lap fingers, resting on it like a lady waiting for a sermon. Reese stood at the front with his groomsman posture, perfect chin lifted, smile fixed. He looked like a man about to be rewarded for patience. When he glanced toward my row again, his eyes held mine a beat longer than before. It wasn't warmth, it was measurement. I gave him a pleasant look and then looked away first because I wouldn't let him feel like he could pull my attention by force. Ribera was seated a few seats down, fanning herself lightly as if she were calm. Her eyes stayed on the aisle, not on the altar. She kept checking her watch like somebody waiting on a delivery. When the officiant moved into position, the room shifted. The talking softened. The phones went still. The air took on that fragile hush that comes right before a bride appears, the moment when everyone turns into an audience, holding their breath. A coordinator slipped into the side aisle, gesturing discreetly to musicians. I watched the small movements around me like chess pieces. The way the photographer adjusted his lens, the way a groomsman tugged his cuff, the way Roberta's lips tightened when she thought nobody was looking. Ree rolled his shoulders once, a calm little reset, then clasped his hands in front of him, like a man ready to accept a gift. The organ swelled, then dipped as if waiting for its cue. A whisper traveled through the pews. "Here she comes." I stayed still. My heartbeat didn't slow, but my face did not change. I watched the back doors. I watched the aisle. I watched the coordinator's face when she glanced toward the bridal hallway and didn't see movement. The coordinator's smile froze for half a second before she recovered it, turning it into professionalism. She leaned toward another staff member and murmured something I couldn't hear. The organ held a note too long, then softened uncertain. Ray's smile stayed on his face, but his eyes shifted quick and sharp. He leaned slightly toward his best man and said something under his breath. The best man's head tilted as if he was listening for an answer that wasn't coming. Roberta stopped fanning. Her hand went still in midair. That was the first real crack in her composure. She glanced toward the side aisle, then toward the back doors, as if Nyla might appear from any direction, like a delayed package. The officiant looked to the coordinator. The coordinator lifted her fingers in a small signal. Wait. The room obeyed because weddings train people to obey. There were still smiles, but they were thinning now, stretched over confusion. A baby fussed somewhere. A woman cleared her throat. Reese's jaw tightened just enough for me to see it from my seat. He checked his watch once, then again, slower, like he was trying not to look pressed. Roberta leaned toward him, whispering fiercely through her polite face. He nodded without looking at her. His fingers unclasped, then clasped again, over and over, like his body was starting to betray what his face was trying to hide. The organ stopped completely. The sudden silence felt like a hand closing around the room's throat. The officiant looked toward the back once more, then toward me, brief questioning, and I met his eyes calmly, giving him no explanation, no warning, no rescue. The ceremony time had arrived. The aisle was empty, and my daughter was not there. The silence didn't last long before it turned into sound. Tiny sounds at first, the kind people make when they don't want to be rude but they can't help being human. A program page slipped from someone's fingers and fluttered to the floor. A heel scraped against the tile. A cough tried to disguise itself as a laugh and failed. Then the whispers started low and spreading like a breeze moving through tall grass. I kept my hands folded over my clutch posture, straight face serene. Because the moment you look panicked in a room like that, people don't just notice, they decide you're responsible. Reese stood at the front, like a statue that had begun to crack from the inside. His smile had not fully left his mouth yet, but it was losing its shape. The corners tightening as if his face didn't know what expression to wear anymore. He looked toward the back doors again, then down the side aisle, then toward the coordinator, as if she could produce Nyla out of thin air. The coordinator moved quickly to the officiant and murmured something hand, lifted in a small, calming gesture. The officiant nodded once then, offered the room a gentle smile. "We're going to take just a brief moment," he said softly, voice smooth, practiced. "Sometimes the bride needs an extra minute. We'll give her that." The groom let out a collective breath, relieved to have permission to wait. Raisa's best man leaned close and whispered, "She's probably just fixing something," but his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as Ree. Roberta Bennett rose from her seat with stiff dignity, smoothing her dress, as if she could iron this moment flat by force. She leaned into the side aisle and caught the coordinator's attention with a sharp tilt of her head. The coordinator approached, keeping her smile polite, and Roberta whispered something I couldn't hear. But I saw the coordinator's eyes flick to the bridal hallway, and then to Ree, and her smile faltered. Roberta's mouth tightened. She whispered again, more forceful. The coordinator nodded quickly, then hurried away, heels tapping faster than they should. I stayed seated. I didn't turn my head. I didn't look at Roberta or Ree or the guests' faces, twisting into curiosity. I watched the aisle itself, the empty stretch of carpet that had been laid out like a promise, and I felt the weight of what that emptiness meant. It wasn't just a delay. It was a decision forming in the shadows behind the bridal door, and I could almost feel my daughter's breath in my own chest, the way fear makes you share air. Reese shifted his weight, stepping closer to the edge of the altar, as if being nearer the aisle might summon her. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone thumb, moving fast screen lighting his face from below. He typed "stop" typed again. His jaw clenched, releasing only when he forced himself to look up and pretend. Roberta stood rigid in the front pew, now half-turned, watching him with a mixture of irritation and alarm, as if she had expected him to be in control and couldn't stand seeing him scramble. Raisa's phone buzzed in his hand once his eyes flicked to it and widened just a fraction. Then he looked around quickly like he didn't want anyone to see whatever he just received. He angled his body away from the guests and typed again harder. The officiant glanced at the coordinator and then at his watch. Another 2 minutes passed, then 3. The organist, unsure, played a soft filler chord that sounded like a question. The coordinator returned from the bridal hallway alone. She approached the officiant and whispered, keeping her body between them and the guests, but I could still see the tension in her throat when she swallowed. The officiant's expression didn't change much. He was trained for awkward moments, but his eyes sharpened. He nodded again, then turned to the congregation with that same calm voice. "Well, take just a little more time," he said, warmth in his tone. "Please remain seated." The warmth was for them. The message underneath was for us. Something is wrong. Ree stepped down from the altar edge and met the coordinator, halfway, voice low and urgent. "Where is she?" he hissed, and even without hearing every word, I felt the pressure in it. The coordinator lifted her hand slightly, palms out, as if trying to keep him from exploding. "She's not ready," she whispered, and her eyes flicked to Roberta like she was begging someone else to handle this. Roberta moved toward them, posture, tall smile pasted on, but her eyes were sharp as blades. "What do you mean, not ready?" she asked, and her voice carried that polite cruelty that turns impatience into etiquette. The coordinator swallowed again. She asked for a moment, she said. Roberta's nostrils flared. Ray's phone buzzed again. His head snapped down, and this time he didn't bother hiding his reaction. His eyebrows pulled together, lips parting slightly as if the message had slapped him. He typed so fast his thumb trembled. Then he hit call. It rang once, twice. He lowered the phone before it could go to voicemail, eyes darting toward the bridal hallway like he might march down it himself. The guests' whispers grew bolder now. I heard my daughter's name in them. I heard my name, too. Someone behind me murmured. Maybe she got cold feet. Another voice answered, "No, something happened. I didn't move, I didn't defend, I didn't explain. I simply sat there like a woman who knew exactly what was happening and had already chosen the outcome." Race's hands were shaking now, just enough to betray him. He opened his messages again, and I saw his screen glow in the dim of the sanctuary as he sent another text longer this time. Frantic enough that even from a distance I could feel the desperation in the way his shoulders hunched. The truth was, my daughter didn't vanish by accident. She left because I got to her before the building could swallow her whole. Right after I saw the way her hand flew to cover that folded paper in her clutch. Right after I heard the tremble in her voice when she begged me not to make a scene. I made my face gentle, and my tone, even like I was helping her breathe, not interrupting a wedding. I leaned close to her ear, careful of pins and perfume and trembling lashes, and I said, "Come with me for 10 minutes. I didn't say why. If I said why, she would have argued. Nyla hates money talk the way some people hate needles. She flinches before the pain even arrives. She stood because she trusts me, and that trust nearly broke my heart. I guided her out of the suite with my hand on the small of her back, smiling at the women in the room like we were stepping out for water, for air for nerves. The corridor was busy, but busy can hide anything if you move like you belong. I led her down the side hallway that runs behind the sanctuary, past the stacked chairs in the little room where they keep extra programs. Nyla kept whispering, "Mom, we don't have time," and I kept saying, "Just 10 minutes." Because I needed her away from lace and expectations, away from Roberta's reach, away from Reese's smile. Outside, the air hit her like cold truth. Her breath caught. She looked at the parking lot like it was too ordinary to hold what she was about to feel. I opened my car door, slid her inside, and shut it gently like I was tucking her into safety. She stared at her hands in her lap, white fabric pooling around her like a storm cloud. And when she finally looked at me, her eyes were pleading again, not for comfort, but for permission to keep believing. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't do this right now." I didn't answer with anger. I answered with what I had because I knew words would not be enough. I pulled my phone out and placed it in her palm. It was warm from my grip. Her fingers trembled around it. "Press play," I said softly. She blinked hard like she couldn't understand why my voice sounded so calm. Then she pressed play. At first she frowned, listening to the muffled sound of a hallway, the soft scrape of shoes, a laugh that didn't belong. Then Roberta's voice came through clear enough to recognize, confident enough to chill. Nyla's mouth opened slightly, confusion sliding into her face. Then Reese's voice followed, relaxed, amused, the exact tone he used when he thought he was charming. Nyla's eyebrows pulled together. She shook her head once as if her body was trying to reject what her ears were hearing. And then it happened, the line that snapped the world clean in half. "That girl is so naive," Reese said, and I watched my daughter's face change at the sound of her own life being reduced to a joke. "I'm only after the money. Her mom is worth $50 million. Roberta laughed, pleased, like she'd raised him right. The sound that came out of Nyla wasn't a scream. It was a small, broken exhale, like her lungs had forgotten how to work. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled so fast the tears didn't even fall neatly. They spilled messy and humiliating, and she stared at the phone like it had bitten her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head hair trembling against her veil. "No, no, no. I didn't touch her yet. I let her feel it in full because grief needs space, or it turns into denial." She hit the back button and played it again like she thought she'd misheard the words the first time. The same laugh, the same certainty, the same cruelty dressed up as strategy. Her shoulders began to shake. Not rage. Rage is sharp and hot. This was grief, heavy and sick, the kind that makes you feel foolish for believing in daylight. "Mom," she choked, voice raw. I loved him. The way she said loved made it sound like she was mourning somebody who had died. And in a way she was. She was mourning the man she thought existed. She was mourning the future she had been rehearsing in her head every night. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the one thing I couldn't let her ignore. The folded paper I'd seen her trying to hide, the one I'd asked about, and she'd tried to explain away as easier. I didn't wave it like proof. I just set it on the center console between us. Nyla looked at it and sobbed harder because she knew what it represented now. The small sacrifices she'd made, the quiet payments, the way she'd softened her own boundaries so he could stand taller. She wiped her face with the back of her hand mascara, smearing breath hitching like she was drowning on dry land. Then she looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Hurt mixed with shame, mixed with clarity, like she could finally see the trap, without being able to unfeel the love. Her voice came out thin like a cracked bell. "I'm not marrying him." The words left Nyla's mouth, and for a moment they just hung there in the air between us, fragile and holy in their own way. "I'm not marrying him." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a performance. It was a woman finally choosing to stop bleeding quietly. But the moment after a decision like that is never clean. The body doesn't catch up as fast as the mind. Nyla's hands kept shaking even after she said it. Her breathing kept skipping like her lungs were still waiting for permission to panic. She stared down at the white fabric pulled over her knees, as if it belonged to somebody else, as if she'd been dressed up to play a role. And now she didn't know how to take the costume off. "I can't," she whispered. And the two words didn't even need an object. I can't go back. I can't face him. I can't stand in front of everybody and pretend my heart hasn't just been humiliated in private. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. Firm, warm, not pitying. Nyla's fingers gripped mine like she was holding on to the only solid thing left. "Breathe," I told her quietly. She tried. It came out jagged. She sucked in air like it had edges. Her eyes lifted to the windshield, unfocused, and I could see her mind running through everything she'd been calling love. "He's been in my bed," she said, suddenly voice breaking on the word bed, like it tasted dirty now. "He's been in my house. He's met everybody I love." He looked my grandmother in the eye and said he was grateful. She laughed once, sharp and miserable, then covered her mouth as if the sound embarrassed her. How do you fake that?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was desperate. Nyla wasn't asking for an answer. She was asking how a person survives the knowledge that her tenderness was treated like a resource. I kept my voice low. "Because he doesn't feel what you feel," I said. He learned what you feel. He learned how to use it. Neela's eyes filled again. I made it easy, she whispered, and shame slid over her face like a veil heavier than the one on her head. She looked down at the folded paper on the console and pressed her lips together hard as if she could bite back a sob. I wanted him to feel safe, she said. I wanted him to feel like I believed in him. Her voice grew thin, almost childlike. When he said he had that old debt from before he met me, I told myself it wasn't his fault. I told myself, if I love him, I help him stand up. When he said he was behind on things and he didn't want to burden me, I heard that as pride. I heard it as him being a man. She swallowed and wiped her face, smearing makeup across her cheek like war paint. And I kept thinking if I just made life smoother, if I just gave a little more, he would relax. He would love me the way I loved him. That was the heartbreak right there. Not the money, not the embarrassment, not even the betrayal. It was the truth that she'd been working for love. Like love was something you earn by paying. Nyla stared at my phone still sitting in her lap and shook her head slowly. He called me naive. She whispered the word, cracking her open like it had a blade inside it. He stood in a church and called me naive. Her breath hitched again. And his mother laughed like I was a joke. She pressed her palm to her chest as if the pain was physical. Mom, I can't walk in there. Her voice rose slightly, not into rage, but into panic. I can't walk down that aisle with everybody looking at me like I'm glowing. I can't smile at him. I can't give him my hand when I know what he thinks when he looks at me. She squeezed her eyes shut hard. If I go back in there, I'll fall apart in front of everybody. Or worse, I'll do it anyway. I'll do it because I don't want to disappoint people. I'll do it because I don't want to admit I was wrong. She opened her eyes and looked at me raw and pleading. And if I do it anyway, she whispered, then he wins. The car was quiet except for her breathing and the muffled, distant sound of the church, somewhere behind us like a heartbeat we were pretending not to hear. I watched Nyla wrestle with herself, love fighting reality, shame, fighting survival, and I saw how deep the trap had been. It wasn't just Ree. It was the idea Nyla had built around him. The wedding, the photos, the relief of finally being chosen. Walking away didn't just mean losing him. It meant losing the story she'd been telling herself about her life. Neela wiped her face again and swallowed hard, forcing her voice to steady. I can't go back in, she said more firmly now, like she was holding herself upright with the words. Then she looked at me, and the next sentence came out like surrender, like trust, like a daughter handing her mother the hardest job in the world. You have to end it for me. Walking back into that church felt like walking into a room where everybody was waiting for you to lie. The sanctuary looked the same, flowers, still sweet light, still pouring through stained glass guests, still dressed in their best, but the air had shifted. It wasn't celebration anymore. It was suspicion wearing a polite face. People stopped whispering when I entered the side aisle the way crowds do when they sense the answer has arrived. I moved with measured steps, not because I wanted drama, but because I refused to look hurried. A woman in the second row reached out as if to stop me eyes wide, and I gave her a gentle nod that said, "Please sit. Please don't make this harder." The officiant stood at the front with his hands clasped, expression calm, but strained eyes flicking between the back doors and the coordinator, like he was praying for a miracle he didn't believe in anymore. Ree was no longer pretending. His phone was in his hand screen, bright. His tie sat slightly off, now the first sign of unraveling. When he saw me, his body shifted forward as if he expected me to bring Nyla behind me like a child returning after a tantrum. His gaze darted past my shoulders, scanning the aisle for white fabric. When he didn't see it, his jaw tightened. Roberta was standing near the front pew, her posture rigid, chin lifted, two high eyes sharp as glass. She watched me like she watched a threat. I slid into my seat and let one full breath go through me, slow and controlled. I could still feel Nyla's fingers gripping mine in the car. I could still see the way her face collapsed when she heard herself called naive. That grief sat inside me now, but I didn't let it touch my mouth. I looked straight ahead at the altar at Reese standing there like a man who thought he was owed a wife, and I waited for the room to settle. The officiant leaned toward the coordinator again, lips moving. The coordinator's hands fluttered slightly, nerves peeking out from underneath her professionalism. The officiant turned back to the congregation, smile gentle, but now edged with uncertainty. "We appreciate everyone's patience," he began, voice warm. "We're just," Reese cut in, voice louder than it needed to be. "What's going on?" The bluntness of it startled the room. Heads turned. Someone in the back let out a small gasp like a bird startled in a church. Ree took a step toward the coordinator, frustration cracking through his practice charm. "Where is she?" The coordinator tried to keep her tone soft. "She needed a moment," she said. Reyes laughed once, sharp, not amused. "A moment," he repeated like the words were an insult. Ribera's hand lifted in a controlling gesture. "This is unacceptable," she said, voice polite but biting. The kind of voice that has embarrassed waiters and bullied school principals. "The guests are here. The schedule is set." The officiant cleared his throat, trying to reclaim calm, sometimes nerves. Ree snapped his head toward the back doors again, then toward me. His eyes found mine and held. For a second, I saw something naked in him. Fear, calculation, anger all moving fast behind his pupils. He took another step closer to my row as if he could pressure me into producing my daughter. "Odessa," he said, and he tried to make it sound respectful, but it came out tight. "Do you know what's happening?" The room went so quiet I could hear the fabric of someone's dress shift. This was the moment Nyla had handed me in that car, the moment she'd said, "You have to end it for me." I felt the weight of every eye, the expectation that I would smooth things over, that I would protect the fantasy, that I would keep the peace. Then I stood. No drama. No trembling hands. I rose like a woman getting up to leave a table where the conversation has turned disrespectful. The movement alone drew a collective inhale from the guests. I turned slightly so my voice would carry without shouting. "My daughter will not be marrying you today." The words landed clean, not cruel, not emotional, final. Gasps rippled through the pews like wind across water. A few people covered their mouths. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. Roberta's face drained, then tightened into rage, so controlled it looked almost dignified. Ree froze for half a second, eyes wide, the confidence in his posture, collapsing like a tent pole pulled out from under it. Then he stepped forward, anger snapping into place where charm used to sit. He lifted his phone in his hand like evidence. "What are you talking about?" he demanded loud enough that the back rows heard. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and that crack was the first taste of regret. "Odessa," he said again, sharper now. "You need to explain yourself." Reese's demand hit the room like a slap disguised as authority. "Explain yourself." The way he said it, loud, sharp, entitled, told me he still believed he could bully the truth back into silence if he pressed hard enough in public. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I let the quiet stretch just long enough for the guests to feel the imbalance, for them to notice the difference between a man demanding and a mother standing steady. Then I looked at him the way you look at someone who has mistaken your restraint for weakness. "You want an explanation?" I said, calm enough to make him uneasy. "Fine." A few people shifted in their seats. Somebody in the third row lifted a phone, trying to be discreet and failing. Roberta's eyes flicked to that phone and narrowed. She took a small step forward as if she could physically block the story from leaving the room. I didn't give her that power. I turned my body slightly so my words carried toward the pews as much as they carried toward the altar. 1 hour before this ceremony, I said, voice steady. I walked into the church hall for a last detail. I kept it simple. No dramatics, no extra flourishes. "I heard you laughing with your mother." Reese's face tightened. "What are you—" He started, but I lifted a hand. Not aggressive, just final. The gesture wasn't to silence him. It was to remind the room who was in control now. "You said my daughter was naive." I continued speaking slowly so nobody could pretend they missed it. You said you were only after the money. You said her mother, me, was worth $50 million. The pews went rigid. Even the people who had been whispering stopped. The air changed thick and stunned. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Lord," like she'd just seen something indecent in church. Ray's mouth opened, then closed again, his eyes darting to Roberta as if she could rescue him with a lie. Roberta's expression was a mask stretched too tight. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, but her voice trembled on the last syllable. I didn't argue. I didn't call her names. I didn't ask for sympathy. I did what women like me have learned to do when someone tries to rewrite reality in front of witnesses. I stayed factual. I heard you, I said, looking straight at Ree again, and I recorded you. The word recorded landed like a gavel. A louder ripple went through the room than real movement, real reaction. Phones came up openly now. Not everybody, but enough. People were no longer pretending this was just nerves. Now they understood it was exposure. Ree took a step toward me, eyes sharp. "You recorded a private conversation," he hissed, trying to flip the wrongdoing onto me. Roberta seized on it immediately. "That's illegal," she said, too loud like volume could make it true. I didn't let her finish. I held Reese's gaze and spoke to the room again. My daughter is not walking down this aisle because she finally heard what I heard, I said, and because she finally understood what she has been living. Ray's nostrils flared. "She's emotional," he spat, and he tried to make it sound like a flaw. "She's overreacting." That word overreacting turned something inside me quiet and cold. "No," I said, still calm. "She's grieving." The softness of that word made the room lean in. Grieving, not angry, not dramatic. Grieving because she loved you. I continued, voice firm but controlled. "She gave you her trust. She gave you her heart. And yes, she gave you help. I didn't list every detail. I didn't need to. The room didn't require an itemized statement to understand what the word help meant. Every bill she covered when you were stressed. Every sacrifice she made so you could stand taller. Every time she smoothed your life and called it partnership." Reese's face flushed. Roberta's hand lifted again, trembling now as if she wanted to snatch the words out of the air. I kept going. "Everything she gave you was love," I said, and I let that sentence sit for one beat so the room could feel it. "Everything you planned was theft." Silence dropped hard after that. Not the polite silence people use when they don't know what to say. This was the kind that makes you hear your own breathing. A man in the back let out a low whistle, then caught himself and shut his mouth. Somebody's phone camera clicked. Reese stood frozen, blinking fast as if his body was trying to outrun the truth by denying it. His lips parted and he swallowed. "That's not what I meant," he said, voice thinner than before. "You're twisting." Roberta lunged into the aisle like a woman arriving to control damage. "Stop," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Stop this right now. You're humiliating." Roberta's voice cut through the sanctuary like she thought she could slice the truth clean in half and leave the pieces on the floor. "Stop this right now," she snapped, stepping closer to my row as if proximity could intimidate me back into silence. Her eyes were wide, hard, furious, yet her mouth still tried to hold a polite shape, because women like Roberta always want to look respectable, while they destroy you. "You're humiliating my son," she said, stressing the word. Humiliating like it was a crime worse than betrayal. "This is a church." Her hand lifted again, finger pointed, shaking just slightly. "You cannot stand here and accuse him with your twisted little story." Ree tried to recover his face, working between anger and panic. "She's lying," he said quickly, louder than he needed. "She's manipulating this. She's mad because she never liked me." He looked toward the pews as if he could recruit the room to his side with volume. "You all know how mothers get." A few guests exchanged looks, startled by how quickly he'd reached for disrespect. Roberta's tone sharpened into something uglier. "If you have any recording," she hissed, You have no right to play it here. I will call the police. I will. Roberta, I said, and I didn't raise my voice. I said her name the way you say someone's name when they are embarrassing themselves and don't know it yet. That one word slowed her for half a beat just enough. I looked at her calmly, then at Ree, then back at the guests who were sitting forward now, eyes wide, phones lifted openly. The room wasn't asking for drama anymore. The room was asking for clarity. I don't need you to admit it, I said, and the quiet in my voice made hers sound even more frantic. I only need everyone to hear what you already said. Roberta's mouth opened, and for the first time her mask slipped, not in public tears, not in outrage and calculation. Her eyes flicked around the room. Who was recording? Who was watching? Who could repeat this story outside these walls? She realized in real time that she couldn't bully a crowd the way she could bully a single woman. Ree stepped forward again. You can't, he started, but his voice cracked. I didn't argue with him. I didn't debate. I didn't explain further. I simply raised my phone, the same one Nyla had listened to in my car, and I pressed the screen once. The sound that spilled into the sanctuary wasn't loud at first. It didn't need to be. It was clear. Roberta's own laugh, Reese's own voice, their private tones smooth and careless, now echoing off church walls that were never meant to hold that kind of ugliness. Heads tilted, faces changed. People who had been unsure now went still, eyes sharpening as recognition landed. Then Reese's line hit the room again, unchanged, undeniable. That girl is so naive. I'm only after the money. Her mom is worth $50 million. The gasp this time wasn't surprise. It was disgust. A woman in the second row shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight. A man near the back muttered, "That's crazy," under his breath. Roberta's face drained of color as if the audio had pulled blood right out of her. Her hands flew up as if she could physically push the sound away. "Turn that off," she shouted, and the shout was raw. Nothing polite left. "Turn it off right now." Reese lunged toward me on instinct, arm lifting like he might snatch the phone, but two men from the front pews stood up so quickly their knees hit the bench. One of them placed a firm hand out, not touching Ree, but blocking space. A silent warning that this wasn't a private hallway anymore. The officiant stepped back slightly, eyes wide, stunned as if he'd just watched a ceremony turn into a courtroom without anyone announcing it. Roberta tried again, voice breaking with rage. "That could be edited," she snapped. "That could be fake." I didn't respond with heat. I responded with one clean movement. I turned the phone screen outward so the people nearest could see the recording timeline, the file name, the timestamp. I didn't wave it like a trophy. I held it steady like evidence. Then I reached into my clutch and pulled out what Nyla had folded tight, the paper she'd tried to hide. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. I simply held it up and said, "This is what love signed when it thought it was being helpful." Nyla's name was a knife in the air, even without me speaking it. The guests' faces tightened again, understanding blooming in layers. The laughter in the hall, the private plan, the paper in the clutch, the empty aisle. Reese's breathing turned loud and uneven, like a man realizing his mask had fallen, and he couldn't pick it up fast enough. His eyes flashed from me to the pews, to Roberta, to the phones recording him. "You did this," he said suddenly, voice rising wild now. "You set me up." Roberta grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, whispering harshly. Stop talking, but it was too late. His face twisted and the charm finally broke completely. He yanked his arm free and snarled, "I should have known you'd ruin everything." Reese's rage didn't scare the room the way he thought it would. It only exposed him more. His voice bounced off the church walls sharp and ugly, and instead of making people shrink, it made them sit up straighter, like everyone could finally see the man behind the pressed suit. Roberta grabbed at his arm again, hissing for him to stop, but he was past listening. He stood there at the front of that sanctuary, sweating through his collar, eyes wild, and for the first time he looked exactly like what he was desperate. You ruined everything. He barked, and the word everything told on him. Not love, not my daughter, everything. Roberta's mouth moved, trying to form a story she could sell, but the story had already been recorded, replayed, and absorbed by 100 faces. The officiant stepped forward, voice gentle but firm as if he was closing a door softly. "We're going to pause," he said to the congregation. "Please remain seated while we sort." "There's nothing to sort," I answered calmly, and my voice didn't need to be loud because the room was already leaning toward me. "There will be no wedding today." That sentence was the final nail. A ripple moved through the pews, not shock this time, but action. People began to stand whispering to one another with that fast energy that spreads when a community realizes it's witnessing something it will talk about for years. A few women shook their heads in disgust, clutching their purses to their chests, as if they needed to physically hold on to their morals. A man near the aisle muttered, "Lord have mercy," like he was embarrassed for the building itself. Phones stayed up, not hidden, now open. Somebody in the back hit record again like they wanted proof for the group chat. Reese looked around and realized too late that the crowd was no longer an audience for his performance. They were witnesses against it. He stepped down from the altar, pointing at me as if pointing could make me the villain. "You're twisting my words," he snapped. "You don't know what. We all know what." A woman's voice cut in from the second row, sharp and offended. Reese turned, stunned that someone had spoken back. Another voice followed, a man's voice this time, calm but cold. "You said it clear." Reese's eyes flicked to Roberta, searching for rescue. Roberta's face had stiffened into a hard smile, the kind you wear when your pride is bleeding out, but you refuse to let anyone see you stagger. She leaned toward him, whispering furiously, but her whisper couldn't change what had already spread across the room. I felt the shift like a door closing behind him, quiet, irreversible. He wasn't just losing a bride, he was losing a world. My daughter's friends, the women who'd welcomed him to dinners, the uncles who'd offered him work connections, the older couples who'd invited him into their homes, those doors were shutting in real time. I saw it in the way people avoided his eyes. I saw it in the way a man he'd shaken hands with earlier now turned his shoulder to block him from walking past. I saw it in the way a woman who'd hugged Roberta in the foyer now stepped back, lips tight, as if she didn't want that stain on her clothes. Reed tried to smile again, just for a second, like he could put charm over the mess and smooth it out. "Everyone, please," he said, voice suddenly softer, attempting respect. "This is a misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding floated in the air and died. He glanced toward the back doors as if Nyla might still appear and save him from himself by choosing him anyway. But Nyla wasn't in that building. Nyla was somewhere breathing through grief, and the fact that she wasn't there was the loudest answer he'd ever received. Ray's face tightened again, and when he spoke next, his voice cracked with panic. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Not at the room now, but at me, like I was the gatekeeper. Bring her here. She needs to talk to me." The audacity of it, after everything, made a soft sound of disbelief ripple through the pews. Roberta stepped forward as if she would force her way to me. "You will give us a private moment," she said, trying to reclaim authority. "This is family business. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her and said, 'You made it public when you laughed in the church hall.'" That landed like a slap because it was true. Reese's breathing went loud again. He looked around, taking in the phones, the faces, the disgust. His shoulders sagged slightly, just a fraction, as if his body finally understood what his pride didn't want to accept. The network he thought he was marrying into had just turned its back on him. People began filing out now, not in chaos, but in a steady stream, the way a community exits when it has collectively decided something is finished. The florist stood frozen near the side aisle, eyes wide. The coordinator looked like she might cry from stress, but even she kept her distance from Ree, as if proximity might contaminate her. Reese took a step after the guests, calling out, "Wait, listen." but nobody turned back. Not one. He stood there in the front of that church, still in his suit, still holding his phone, still wearing the face of a man who had expected applause. And I watched the regret settle on him in layers. No bride, no chairs, no access, no future leverage, just him exposed in the place he'd planned to seal the deal. And as the last of the pews emptied, he turned back to me with something close to hatred. "Where is Nyla?" he said, voice trembling. "Tell me where she is." When the church finally emptied, the silence left behind wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm. Heavy, damp smelling, like something has been torn down, and nobody knows what to build next. I didn't stay to watch Ree spiral. I didn't stay to trade words with Roberta. I'd said what needed to be said. The rest was just noise. I walked out through the side door away from the front steps where guests would gather and gossip and look for one more angle of the story. Outside, the sun felt too bright for what had just happened. The air was crisp, indifferent, and the parking lot looked almost normal. Cars lined up, a few people standing in small clusters, phones still in their hands, voices low and urgent. I kept my eyes forward and moved like a woman on a mission because I was. Nyla wasn't in that building, but she was close enough for my heart to feel her. She hadn't gone far. She couldn't. Grief doesn't run, it collapses. I found her where I knew she'd be, inside my car, curled in the passenger seat, like a child who had finally stopped trying to be strong. The veil was half off her head, now caught awkwardly in her hairpins loosened. Her dress bunched at her knees, white fabric wrinkled and stained at the hem where it had brushed the ground. Her face was blotchy mascara, smeared eyes swollen from crying so hard she'd made her own skin hurt. She looked up when I opened the door, and the sound that came out of her wasn't a word. It was a broken breath, the kind you make when you've been holding yourself together with your teeth, and they finally slip. "Mom," she whispered, and her voice cracked open on the second syllable. I slid in beside her, shut the door, and the outside world went muffled again. For a moment, I just sat there with her, letting the space fill with her breathing and my steady presence. Because in moments like that, the body needs proof that it's not alone. Neela's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't keep them still. She kept rubbing her fingertips together as if she could erase the last hour from her skin. "I can't believe it," she said, voice thin and raw. "I can't." She swallowed hard. Then her face crumpled again, and the tears came in a rush. Not dramatic tears, not the kind women cry for sympathy. These were private tears, humiliating in their honesty, the kind you cry when your heart realizes it has been loving someone who was never loving back. I reached across the console and pulled her into me. Nyla folded against my chest like her body had been waiting for permission to fall apart. Her shoulders shook, her breath hitched. Her hands clutched at my sleeve like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. I held her tighter, not gentle but firm, because she needed to feel contained. "I feel stupid," she whispered into my shoulder, and the word stupid sounded like poison in her mouth. "I feel so stupid, Mom." My throat tightened. "You are not stupid," I said quietly, pressing my cheek against her hair. "You are loving. That's not the same thing." Nyla sobbed harder, and I felt her grief soaking through my dress like rain. He looked at me like I was his plan. She choked like I was just a step. Her voice broke on step, and I knew she was remembering every moment she'd ignored her own discomfort to keep the relationship smooth. Every time she'd paid something and told herself it was temporary, every time she'd made herself smaller so he could feel bigger. I kept trying to be the kind of woman who makes a man feel safe, she whispered, and he was never trying to make me safe. That sentence was the heart of it, not the 50 million, not the humiliation in the sanctuary. The betrayal was that she had been building a home inside her body for a man who was only looking for keys. I rocked her slightly, not like a baby, but like a wounded adult who needed rhythm to survive the moment. Outside the car, a shadow passed. I heard voices somewhere distant, quick gossip, a laugh that sounded nervous. Nyla stiffened immediately, panic flashing through her. Are they still talking? She whispered, lifting her head. Her eyes darted to the windows as if the world was watching. They're going to say, I ran. They're going to say, I cupped her face gently and made her look at me. Let them talk, I said steady. They were going to talk either way. Today the difference is you didn't sacrifice yourself to keep them quiet. Nyla's lips trembled. I wanted it to be real, she whispered. I wanted him to be real. I nodded once, swallowing the anger that wanted to rise. Anger would be easy. Anger would feel like revenge, but this wasn't revenge. This was rescue. I know, I said softly. That's why it hurts like this. Nyla's eyes squeezed shut, and she leaned into my hand like she couldn't hold her own face up anymore. Her breathing slowed slightly, still broken but less frantic. What do I do now? She whispered, voice small. I held her again, forehead resting against her hairline, and I let my voice stay low, not giving her a speech, just a direction. Right now, I said, you breathe. You grieve what you thought you had, and you let me carry the rest until your legs remember how to stand. Neela clung to me, shaking quieter now. And in that small, private space with her tears and my arms around her, the truth settled in my bones. I didn't ruin a wedding. I saved my daughter from a marriage that would have ruined her. The days after the canceled wedding didn't feel like victory. They felt like waking up after a car accident, alive, grateful, and still shaking, because your body keeps replaying what could have happened. Nyla stayed with me for a while, not because she couldn't afford her own place, but because her mind needed somewhere safe to land. The first night she barely slept. She would jolt awake with her breath trapped in her throat, eyes wide in the dark like she was still hearing, his voice echoing off church walls. I learned to keep the hallway light on, not bright, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. In the mornings, she moved slowly like her body was heavier than it used to be. She would sit at my kitchen table with a mug of tea she didn't finish and stare at nothing, grieving the version of her life she'd been rehearsing in her head. Then little by little, she started doing something that looked simple from the outside but was the hardest part of healing. She started telling the truth out loud. Not to the whole world, not for a show, just to herself and to me. I ignored things she whispered one morning, voice, quiet eyes on the steam rising from her cup. I ignored the way he always needed help, but never wanted to talk about his own plans. I ignored how his mother spoke to me like I was a child. She swallowed hard, ashamed. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. You don't punish yourself for loving, I told her. You learn from where the love got used. That became our rhythm. Grief, then clarity, then one small act of reclaiming. Nyla didn't rebuild by making a speech or posting a statement. She rebuilt the way grown women rebuild, by closing doors, by changing routines, by correcting paperwork, by reclaiming peace in quiet steps. She blocked everywhere, not in a dramatic burst, but in a deliberate sweep. Phone, email, social accounts, one by one, each click like a brick, laid in a new boundary. When unknown numbers started calling, she didn't answer. When a message came through from a friend asking for closure, she deleted it without responding. She wasn't being cruel. She was refusing to be pulled back into a loop designed to drain her. The second week, she asked me to sit with her while she sorted through the gifts that had already arrived for the wedding boxes stacked in my hallway, like a future that never happened. She didn't cry over everyone. She didn't collapse into nostalgia. She simply opened them, made decisions, and wrote return labels with a steady hand. It wasn't coldness. It was control returning to her body. At the same time, I did what mothers do when a predator has been near their child. I secured what remained, not with theatrics, with boundaries. I made sure the accounts Nyla had helped him with were separated cleanly. I made sure any shared arrangements she'd made out of love were ended properly. I didn't announce it to the world because protection doesn't need applause. Protection needs follow through. The hardest part wasn't the practical cleanup. The hardest part was watching Neela mourn the person she thought Ree was. Some evenings she would stand at my window and stare at the streetlights like she was looking for the moment where it all changed. He held my hand. she said once, voice shaking. He prayed with me. He talked about kids. Her eyes filled again, slower now, less frantic, more sorrowful. Was any of it real? I didn't give her a lie to soothe her. Some people can perform care without feeling it. I said gently, that doesn't mean your feelings were fake. Nyla nodded, wiping her face. And for the first time, she didn't call herself naive. She called herself human. Ree tried to reach us, of course, not with apology. That sounded like accountability, with anger that sounded like entitlement. After the wedding, Ree tried to reach us through other people. He sent messages through mutual friends, church members, and anyone who would still listen, accusing me of turning Neela against him, as if my daughter had no mind of her own, as if she were something that could be taken from him. A few days later, Roberta made one final attempt. She came to my door with her stiff smile and wounded pride, insisting that we had ruined a good man. But by then, even she could not protect that lie. The audio had spread too far. His own words were already on too many phones, moving through the same social circles he'd worked so hard to impress. People who once shook his hand now avoided his eyes. Invitations stopped coming. Doors that had once opened for him quietly closed. The community he thought he could marry into became the very wall he could not climb. Ree did not just lose a wedding. He lost the image he had planned to live behind. And Nyla changed too. My soft-hearted daughter did not become bitter. She did not become cruel. She simply became awake. 1 month later, she stood in my kitchen wearing jeans and a simple top, her hair pulled back her face, calm and bare. Then she said quietly, almost as if she was surprised by her own peace, I can breathe again. That was the ending I wanted. Not revenge, not noise, not applause, just breath, safety, truth. In our family, Ree will not be remembered as a fiancé. He will be remembered as the man who was exposed on the very day he thought he had won. And when people ask me if I feel guilty, I tell them the truth. I did not embarrass him. I simply told the truth in the one place he could never escape it.
Thank you for listening to my story. I truly appreciate you staying with me until the end. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. If it touched you in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you are listening from. I'll see you in the next story.